Welcome to Capital Mondays, everybody. So good to have you all back again. We're doing a special little episode here for the weekend of February 18th and Monday the 19th. We're joined by Sahil. Good to have you back, man. How you doing?
I'm all right. It's been a busy week and stuff. A little tired, but happy to be here.
Yeah, we're both kind of there as well. We were going to do this, then we were going to do that, and then we were going to do this, and then we didn't have time to do the things that we were going to do, and then thankfully you came on here right when we were in our crisis of what we were going to do, and I was like, man, I've been wanting to just kind of come back to you, come back around to you for a while now. And so first of all, everybody, it's okay that Sahil is smoking a cigarette on camera. I just wanted you all to know it's okay. Now, is it okay that he's smoking indoors? Like, I don't know, but I think he wanted to make sure it was okay, and then he double checked. It's okay. It's okay. I mean, we have Rudy on a lot of the things that we're doing, and he's smoking cigarettes. I mean, and as Nance was just holding up right before we started recording here, I mean, he's always doing like this.
I am almost always chewing tobacco. Almost always. I often fall asleep with tobacco in my mouth as well. So I'm a degenerate, and you can't take it from me. The one that said that told me, "Don't, for the love of God, don't chew and talk at the same time." Like they said don't chew and read at the same time, because I was reading aloud. Yeah. Then I would never ever read aloud. I won't give up tobacco. I want to hasten my death, and this tastes good.
Damn, that's the kind of thing I used to say about cigarettes. It's like, and it's kind of like, it's like irresolute anticipation of death, you know? You're microdosing your way to death, you know?
They don't know I smoke cigarettes. They don't know.
All right, Sahil. I kind of want to give you this opportunity to like introduce yourself a little bit more than the last time when you came on, and it was a lot more like, oh, we're focused on this value form debate, blah blah blah. Today, I kind of wanted it to be about like, it's really cool that you're here. Like, it's not just here on the stream, not just here, but also you're in the United States, and you're doing some grad school stuff, but this is not grad school stuff that is related to these kinds of questions that we are asking together. That means that this is stuff that you've researched on your own time. And so I guess I want to start with just asking you, how did you come into Marxism? What is it that got you to where you are now in terms of you've got some Marxist chops that I don't think most American Marxists have, right? So where did you get those?
Okay, yeah, like, I guess partly, I mean, the origin story, if you will, like my beginning is basically because like I grew up in a family, like my dad was a member of the, one of the biggest ones, the Communist Party of India, and like not the CPIM. But yeah, like, so my dad was sort of active in a specific way, because like it has different, activities, whatever. And so as a result, like a lot of the people that my parents were, like their colleagues, if you want, whatever, like they were all, comrades, right? Like they were all members of the party and stuff. So like, I sort of grew up around that stuff. And so like I sort of grew up knowing there's all these things. And then sure, like as I joined college, I was like, okay, I wanted to do like at least this minimum kind of a thing was already in me. It wasn't simply just about, yeah, whatever, get a good job or that life or whatever. No, I was like, yeah, I need to do something. And so it was like, and following what I had known, I basically joined a student, group, student organization, which was the student organization of the Communist Party, right? Like in my undergrad days and all. And so I did a bit of that, which was mostly just, campus student organizing, like not, which was weird for me partly in certain ways because its activities were like kind of split between, on the one hand, very almost apolitical but very daily, sort of issues of the student population, those kind of things. But then on the other hand, was like very explicitly political, but political also in a very specific sense of the, like, yeah, we take a march against, organize a march against neoliberal policies or, things like that, like very explicitly those kind of things. But oftentimes there would be like, I often felt two sort of things missing. One, that it would often feel that there's not a real, connection between these two moments of our organizing. Like, how are we, thinking about student life or whatever, campus politics and all of that in relation to those things, the broader political issues. And then there was almost like a very almost, I mean, and now of course all of this is coming from me as my own personal, how I experience those things, a certain lack of like very direct theoretical engagement with, the questions, very central questions. Okay, what is capitalism, or what is the relation between capitalism and what we are fighting against, neoliberalism, in that moment? Because this was like in, late 2000s, like 2009, 2010, around those times. And that was like, there's a lot of like new, privatization, globalization, all of those things were like totally, like, that was one of the peak moments in India. So, we were doing a lot of stuff around that. But that was a couple of years, and by the end of it, I was like, things were not working out, and I sort of jumped ship. Like, but then I found other people, who were also in various ways kind of dissatisfied with, various different political, like, communist groups. And there have been a lot, like there are a lot in India. So that is sort of when I discovered this other, very much smaller in a certain sense, organization group, loosely held organization. Yeah. And so with
Loose
them,
what?
we loosely held, organization. Like, it wasn't like a formal, properly political party or like anything like that. And yeah, so that was broadly sort of the group, I guess we can call, like, one of their websites, blogs, was called, Radical Notes. So that was the more, like, one way to put it, I guess, an umbrella organization in a sense. And with them, there were a couple of other um, sort of subgroups. Like, there was the correspondence committee, and then we started in sort of a new thing called the university worker, which was, so I guess broadly what I can say is, so this was a group formed of like various kinds of ex-communists from various tendencies. And in India, we have from, so like there's the long history of the official communist parties themselves, which, like, originally the first main communist party was formed back in 1925, 20 or 25. There are like two disputed dates, whatever. But yeah, like then, that was the dominant communist party until like 1964, which is when there was a split in that party, and a new one, CPIM, Communist Party of India Marxist, came up. And so, which basically overtook the older CPI. And then since then, there have been like multiple splits. So this split was more around the lines of, okay, the CPI was, more sort of pro-Russia, like Soviet Union, and the CPIM, the newer one, took the Chinese side. And then, but within the CPIM, in just a 4 or 5 years later, there was further splits, so which came up with the more explicitly Maoist tendencies within the party. And from that, like, then there was the armed struggle phase, and with the Maoists in the forests in the east, and that like stayed for a long time. right? And yeah, and then so those are a couple of, I guess, tendencies. The most official, most in a certain sense orthodox one, CPI. Then there was the CPIM, which was like kind of pro-China, but not as much as the full-on armed struggle Maoist kinds, which then they were the third ones. Yeah.
One of the hardest things to keep track of whenever I talk to a leftist is like acronyms. So really quick, CPIN is like this more like it's China friendly, but it's not like super hardcore. And then the super hardcore one would be what?
Those were, so at first.
Oh, there's a multiple.
Sorry.
There's multiple.
Oh yeah. So at first, so see, I'm just gonna write all these in the chat if.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
So there was CPI, that was the first one. Then there was CPI brackets M, which is so Communist Party of India, Marxist, right? That's the second one, right? The 1964 split. So these were the CPI M were the guys who were like more pro-China over Soviet Russia, right? But they were not like full on like Mao, like within the Indian context, their politics wasn't that, we need to go against the Indian state, like do an armed, struggle or anything like that. But then I think in 1967, there was the CPI ML. So, Communist Party of India, Marxist Leninist, right? And yeah, and so these were the more like armed struggle, and so this was basically in I think around 1967. There was this village in northeast India called Naxalbari. That was the name of a village. And so there basically sort of spontaneously there was a like local like peasants and farm workers and all, they basically just rebelled and just violently just killed off the landlords and overtook the lands and sort of implemented a direct, redistribution and all of that. So the CPI-ML people who were previously part of the CPI-M faction, they broke off and they were like, that's the way, that's the way we need to be organizing, across India. And like, that's like armed struggle is the, sort of mode that for the struggle right now. Right. So this was what like came to become, the properly explicitly Maoist sort of factions. And so, yeah, but this was like 1967. So since then, of course, this faction itself has gone through multiple different, shapes and forms, many splits and everything. But then so there are various ways to differentiate between them, but one of the common things that still binds them all together in a certain sense, and which kind of relates to where I many decades later where I found myself was, so for most of the like traditional CPs, communist parties, for them one of the things that they, in terms of their analysis of the the global analysis and the situation of India, for them it was like, okay, yeah, we are, as Lenin said, capitalism has reached the stage of imperialism, right? So we are finance capital and all of that, right? So the globally there's the imperialist factions, and then there's the either the colonies or ex-colonial countries, etc., right? And these are the peripheries. So there was this almost also at the same time, the dependency theories and all of those. So there was a link between that. And so the understanding for India was that India is not yet a properly capitalist country. India is a semi-colonial, semi-feudal country. And so, for example, like, given in the first world, whatever they've already had their own, properly successful bourgeois revolutions. And so therefore they can. So they were following a, stagist, clearly very stagist kind of a, model of history, right? Historical development. So for them, okay, they can have a struggle for socialism directly, right? They can wage that struggle. But for us in India, we haven't even had our, bourgeois revolution yet. Like we are still fighting against both, capitalists, whatever, some big capitalists, but overall broadly, the Indian society is still like for the vast majority of people, their primary, antagonism is with actually feudal elements, right? So because we haven't even had a bourgeois revolution, we are still sort of fighting feudalism here, right? And internationally, we can be part of this, sort of a broader, call it some kind of popular front or something against imperialism, right? So that was, and this was something that loosely, it can be said, kept all of these in a like, for me, like this brings all of these groups into a similar, faction, irrespective of, they may have, all sorts of different, debates around and differences around, what the best strategy would be for, getting to something like this was the position in China, right? The new democratic revolution. But in India, so, like the CPIM, we're talking about the People's Democratic Revolution, which is, again, it's like a middle, mid stage between the current stage, which is a kind of a pre-bourgeois revolution stage, and before a properly socialist revolution. Like, before we can have a properly socialist revolution, because we don't even have capitalism. Before that, we need a democratic bourgeois, a pro-people's bourgeois kind of revolution. So essentially a kind of a social democratic, thing. But
Nance.
So I just wanted to ask, and that's like a tenet of all the tendencies there, not just the Maoists, not just that's to be properly, that's so they kind of hold that hard line of the stages across the spectrum. That's interesting.
For the vast majority, yes. Like, except for then, so the first organization, a properly formally, like a communist organization, which was to even put forward this idea that no, that we, like, India really is already properly a capitalist country, and so the stage for us is to be fighting for a socialist revolution and not, any previous steps, was called like CLI, which was like the Communist League of India. Yeah, and so I mean, I don't know too many specifics of their own sort of history and all, but like, yeah, this was this is back in, like, in 1980s, at some point in the 1980s. So that was the first time, one of the, like, communist organization was like, no, we are in the, like, we are in capitalism and we need to be fighting for socialism already. So, but yeah, like, but vast majority of the others, and like till date, like explicitly, at least in terms of their, their constitution, their strategy documents and everything, their programs, party programs, no, we are still, like, India is still like a semi-feudal, semi-colonial, state. And so our primary antagonism is against, really primarily against the imperialist countries, right? And so, and within India, and which is partly why, so the CPI, the first one, and then also CPIM, for the most part, they were kind of cool with, sort of working with the dominant ruling party in India, which was the Indian National Congress, which was the biggest party under which sort of India gained its independence from the British in 1947, right? So, and then they were also kind of like, around that time, they were all like, all the dominant, freedom fighters, but all the parties for, India's freedom, they were all broadly like leftist, party, right? They were like socialists. And so even in India's constitution after its freedom in 1947, like, one of the first main words which defines India as a country was, that India is a socialist, sovereign, socialist, secular republic, right? So like, so for the longest time, for the Indian Communist parties, it was like, we can work with this, government, with this ruling, Indian state. It's not exactly a, a capitalist, like a properly purely bourgeois state. No, it's like I mean, it's a still corrupt state, whatever, but we can work with it, progressive in a sense, right?
I don't want to derail. I do think that's interesting. And I kind of like taking a stance where they're maybe still in a state of transition. I definitely don't hold to like the necessary progress from feudalism to socialist utopia. But I do think, from my outsider dumbass American perspective, India is interesting, and can kind of show us where capitalism fails, and how the failures of capitalism are only going to become more exaggerated as we here at the heart of the empire move into the future. The disparity and the castes and all that, I don't think it's too dissimilar from what people like me will see. And yeah, that's interesting.
So I mean,
it's kind of like, it feels, I don't think we can derail Sahil. I think he knows exactly where he's going. And so but also that's just my feel. That's how it feels. So if I'm wrong here, fucking, just let us know. But I want to make sure that we get to, what is the Radical Notes position on, because it seems like this is the orthodoxy, and my sense for the RNs is like, it's not RNs for Radical Notes. I'm guessing like it's not going to be the same or something like that.
No. So no, that's partly the reason why I ended up closer to this group, sort of, right? So so for Radical Notes broadly, no, India is capitalist properly, and in fact, like, that is part of the limitations or whatever of various traditional Marxist frameworks, that they have not really grasped, in a certain sense. Like, I guess I'll put it in, and now these are all my own terms, because it's not like we have a program like that, kind of a document or something, like, where these things are laid out and all of us pledge allegiance to that, whatever. But like, these are my articulations at this point. So what most of the traditional orthodox, whatever, Marxist organizations have not really grasped, in a certain sense, is really the essence of capitalism, which is, for them, what they end up looking at is very concrete forms of historically concrete forms of manifestations of capital. And we end up oftentimes, and this is true not only for certain traditional orthodox like Marxists, but also of its critics, oftentimes, that for them, and that same problem becomes, for the critics, becomes a proof of Marxism's like irrelevance, which at the same time, or which is also on the other side, it's like a crisis of Marxism for the Marxists themselves, right? Which is that, okay, like, late 19th century, early 20th century, that was when we could actually see a working class, which was revolutionary and everything. We could actually see, like, people could identify themselves as the workers or working class, the proletariat, and there was clearly a bourgeoisie, and there were, like, those fights were both concretely visible and they made sense in a certain sense, right? And whereas, like, post basically the depression, like the Great Depression and all, right, and especially post the Second World War, it's like the terrain, like the face of capitalism changed. And partly it's like because in the first world we had the welfare state, or all these, like, social democracy almost. And on the other hand, in the second world, there was socialism, right? And the third world broadly was like, either with the first side, or it was just plain the dumping ground, sort of everything that was going wrong in the first world, or we were so. But like, what ended up happening in this, especially the second half of the 20th century, is like capitalism as that classic old, like, all those sort of prophecies that Marx and Engels made about, progressively, all the everything solid melts into air, and all the, like, progressively, all these kinds of various classes, various social formation, like groups, will more and more be start to sort of condensed into essentially only two classes will be left, right? The bourgeoisie and the proletariat. And on the other hand, what we are looking at, especially in the later half of the 20th century and the 21st century, is that now Like, I mean, even the proletariat's gone, even the, the bourgeoisie, like now we have these, mega corporations and all of this kind of stuff, right? It's a whole different terrain. So how do
it
we
just
make
doesn't it just
right?
doesn't divide out that way. And there's also the, imperialism isn't just like, I think from, maybe I need to revisit The Wretched of the Earth, but my impression from, Fanon is that, there's these contradictions within all of these colonized countries. You have the rural people and you have the city people, and there's the splits between the petty bourgeoisie and they're different. Like so like these splits are causing a problem for this class development. But I don't, and this is where I say, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think he actually talks about the brain drain part of imperialism, where all you guys, the fucking top of the top, are coming to the United States and places like here to make something of your life. And so, but that's happening everywhere, right? Everywhere, the most talented and the most successful are going into the university system, and the university system is geared towards exporting you.
Yep.
And so these are contradictions that you're dealing with, that RN is also kind of addressing, right?
Yeah. So regarding just as a momentary, like a very brief address to this problem, see, so my and Radical Notes and our groups major thing is, how do we make sense of all of these, like exactly all these things that we look at all these phenomena and trying to make sense of them in all these various ways. The way I see it, there's really a very clear way to understand these in the abstract terms of Capital, the book, right? Das Kapital, which is like what Marx there is talking about, or what Marx is laying out there, is that, call it the essence, and then or the abstract. First he begins with the most abstract and he rises to the concrete, right? He slowly more and more develops it towards more and more of its concrete forms of manifestations, in which that abstract logic takes concrete shape. So even the example that you just gave us, right? Like people like me, a lot of these people who from these, I'm trying to, okay, so there's the classic original sort of divide between manual and intellectual labor, right? And that's also the problem that Zonrath is trying to address with this book, right? Intellectual and manual labor, right? That is one of the first things, how things begin. Marx's whole laying out of the dialectic between labor and capital, right? Or in other words, where they are really both the same things. And that is also partly Pushtone's point, that you cannot have a critique of capital from the standpoint of labor. Why? Because capital is labor, labor is capital. There are specific forms of its own, like it's the same thing. Like it is labor itself that becomes capital and comes to rule over itself, right? Now the logic, the antagonistic, the dialectical oppositional logic that's playing out between these two terms, capital and labor, right? It is that as the more labor is performed, right, the more labor is activated, labor becomes living labor, the more it embodies itself as dead labor, right? More and more it takes a shape in front of itself, and it's dead labor, which is both value and self-well rising value, moving value, which is capital, right? And then capital starts to dominate and direct labor, right? Now what is happening in all of this is, it's not simply, and this is basically in the later part of Capital, when we get to the technical and the organic composition of capital, where what we start to see is all the constant capital, all the machinery, all the tools of of production, of all the means of production, right? They come out of, first of all, the living labor, the manual labor that is being performed. the more and more, the workers work, right? They increase the size and the side of dead labor that is accumulated on the other side, which now belongs to the capitalist, right? Which is expanding the side of capital. And what the capitalist wants to do is reduce. There is this constant reduction already happening in terms of the ratios between how much is spent on variable capital and how much is spent on constant capital, right? Because the more living labor is performed, the bigger the side of dead labor becomes, right? And thereby, as a result, also, so you have the dead labor keeps on being converted into constant capital, right? Machinery. So over time, as a capitalist, I want to reduce the money I spend on variable capital, right? I want to keep on kicking out workers, right? Pay less and less in wages, right? And more I will employ technology, machinery, and all of that stuff, right? So what am I? Or what is brain drain, or all of this stuff? This is over time the extraction or the intensification of labor, right? And this is again another aspect. In the first chapter he mentions this. He will say we'll only really consider in our analysis simple labor and not complex labors. Why? Because he says complex labor is merely just a more intensified form of simple labor. And so when we are sort of calculating the value of something, those things are already taken into account. So what is and Marx still use these terminologies, right? An unskilled worker and a skilled laborer or whatever, right? The skilled laborer only has in more intensified form, right? Accumulated form, previous knowledge or previous labor, right? That other people have already performed, right? Which is why. So what is training, or what is being, educated in a university or, technical institutions? You are gaining all the past labor that has been performed and all the result. And so Alfred Zornrathel has this other essay called Science as Alienated Consciousness, right? Which is where what he's talking about is how, so technology, the know-how, the, like science as it exists within capitalism, it is basically accumulated, or yeah, accumulated consciousness, right? All the new and new, information or knowledge that is produced.
And that would also be, how do we say this? Artificial general intelligence, right? Right.
Okay. What's that term?
I mean, Nance, you're the one who's been researching it, but pretty much, I mean, this is where we get to say that AI and capital are like the same thing. Like the way that and this comes out of, theories of artificial general intelligence, right? But, you might want to say something about it, Nance.
The calcified, essentially, objectified labor, the over the years, the accumulation of just dead labor, is the machine that is kind of driving the boat at this point. And it operates as a form of artificial intelligence because it's external to us, and we fetishize it, and it's nothing but, as you were saying, it's the product of living labor that gets turned back on, ultimately the living labor itself, to become an instrument of its own. I mean, you could say oppression, you could say alienation, you could say extraction. But yeah, absolutely. It acting as an artificial intelligence is what we're confronting in this current historical phase.
I love that you're always going back to Zornrathel, because, it's like over here at Capital Mondays, it's been like, yeah, we want to be reading Capital, but we also want to have all of these expansion packs on the table. And Zornrathel's been one of those guys I've been interested in ever since reading Sublime Objective Ideology, right? So this has been, I always am like, wow, I can't believe someone did that. I can't wait to read him. But it's always been deferred, right? And now you just brought up another source, and it sounds like a source that would be essential for thinking about the capital AI connection.
Absolutely. Like, I mean, so that's the whole thing, right? So essentially what the real question for me partly is precisely, how do we understand everything, even all these, various, the new phenomena that we are looking at, that we every other day. Now, for example, even the question of neo-feudalism or, techno-feudalism and all of these things, right? Like, is capitalism itself turning into something new? Right? All of these questions, like, we need to be looking at, and this is the one way in which I still at times I absolutely affirm myself an orthodox Marxist in this way, despite everything else that I've said, right? But for me, there is, because what Marx has laid out in Capital is the abstract, call it the essence or whatever of capitalism, how it functions. And then, of course, there's always this change in its concrete forms of manifestation, and that is the logic. That is what we need to understand. So how is it still, like, despite all the differences, what is and how is it still the same? Essentially, we are still there. It's still the same. Its forms of manifestation keep on changing, and they necessarily have to, as a result of historical developments. They will change its concrete forms of manifestation, but the logic underlying it, right, that's what we need to grasp. And so, and that is, for me, like, what Marx lays out there in terms of the relationship between and these are various forms, again, of where we are looking at it from, living labor and dead labor, or variable capital and constant capital, and the organic composition of capital, right? That is the whole relationship between, okay, fundamentally, value can only be, the only source of value is abstract labor. And this is where also one of the things that often trips people up, in if we are going by the labor theory of value, then it sounds like labor is the source of all wealth. And on the other hand, Marx himself in the Critique of Gotha program will say, oh yeah, that's a bullshit, statement. Labor is the source of all wealth. No, that's a bourgeois, notion. No, labor and nature are both equally, sources of wealth, right? Where does that, like, what's up with that? What is Marx, like, is he contradicting himself? Like, did he say something wrong in Capital? Like, what's going on? Because in Capital, at least, he doesn't say anything different. Like, he all he says is, yeah, because the point is, we need to be able to first separate and distinguish and see these two things as different, which is value, and which is the cell, whatever, the purest and simplest form of capital, and wealth. And wealth and value are not the same thing, first of all, right? Right. And so, yeah, I mean, I can
on this,
yeah,
does Postone say that, kind of like with when Marx kind of sometimes is transhistoricizing labor, other times he's not? Does he also sometimes conflate wealth and capital, and other times he's very careful not to? Or does he always maintain that distinction?
So the thing is, it's been a while for me since I read Pushtun. So I never really paid, like, back last time when I read it, I did not pay attention to these specifics. But the sense that I have from everything that I remember from Pushtun, I would not expect him to do this, even though I think he doesn't really focus on it, like, in that very concrete sense. But like,
you mean Postone doesn't focus on it?
Yeah, that's
he definitely brings it up. Now, I'm not sure. Now, the question of whether it's being conflated by Marx from time to time, that's sure. I don't know if Postone gets into that, but I know that Postone does really emphasize the difference between capital and wealth. And that's
okay.
And he says that that's an essential
value
thing.
And wealth.
Value
and wealth.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And value as a form of social wealth.
Yeah.
Necessarily social wealth. He is clear about that. But maybe later he does do some conflation. I don't know.
No,
but
I mean, but my expectation, and which is why I'm saying I don't remember the specifics, but my expectation is that Pushtun would not conflate these two. Irrespective
Postone doesn't. No.
Yeah. Like,
no, Postone does not.
Even
no.
Yeah.
No, the question was not, does Postone conflate these two things? The question was, does Postone point out that Marx sometimes conflates these two things? Because this is whole, the whole thing with Pistone's reinterpretation is that Marx was, absolutely the best in history as far as like getting down to the fundamental logic of capital. But there are certain things that he seemed to vacillate on, that he seemed uncertain about, that he seemed to go back and forth on, and labor was one of them. So this is why we have this contradiction between the critique of capital from the standpoint of labor in Marxism and the critique of labor in capital, right? Now, Marx is he kind of vacillates between these two positions, and part of that really you can kind of just, and this is Pistone, you can bring it all down to labor. Is it a trans-historical thing that is the source of all wealth throughout all history? Or is it, when he says labor, is he talking about the form of labor in capitalism? And almost most of the time, and this is according to Pistone, most of the time when Marx is saying labor, he is saying within capitalism. So we're talking about a critique of labor within capital. And then the only issue here is that Marx, he really does back that up, that he is talking about labor within capital. But there are times that he's writing where he does then slip into trans-historicizing it. And so it is kind of,
So, okay. So let's call this for the moment a very brief, but my defense of Marx on this question, at least only of Marx at the moment, and not, of Marxism as it, emerges in the various forms later on, right? With Marx, look, one can read absolutely in Marx a trans-historicization of labor. For example, very concrete example, chapter 7, the first part of chapter 7, where he talks about, the first part of chapter 7 is the labor process. The second part of chapter 7 is the valorization process. Now, in the first part of it, how Marx will talk about labor, he very emphatically, explicitly states it's a trans-historical process. He absolutely says it. But that's the point, that in the first section, he is talking about labor as the metabolism between man and nature or whatever. And labor as that metabolism, this interaction between, man who is also part of nature, and between nature as, the raw material or whatever. This interaction, yes, A, is a trans-historical thing, and B, this is labor, but this is something different from labor as labor exists as a concrete form within capitalism. That is what he talks about in the second section of that chapter, which he titles the valorization process, because valorization process precisely because value, where is value? Value is in labor, but not in this trans-historical form of labor, but rather in this abstract kind of labor, right? So and Beautiful. That is where, from the first chapter, right, he will very clearly demonstrate that there's this dual character, not simply in commodities, but also there's this dual character in labor itself, right? So labor, for example, is concrete labor, and then there is abstract labor, and that is one of the reversals that we touched upon, only barely touched upon last time, which is Marx will point out. Now, often, usually we would imagine that, okay, abstraction, for example, irrespective of if it's a real abstraction or if it's an abstraction in thought, we can, if we are just talking about these terms right now, we would imagine that abstraction comes later, right? Or in a certain sense, abstraction is secondary. The concrete is primary. The concrete things that I have in front of me, they come first, and then we abstract from them, right? However, what Marx is demonstrating right off the bat from the first chapter is this relationship in capitalism gets reversed. That everything concrete, use value of the coat becomes the form of manifestation of the value of linen, right? The relationship gets reversed. And this is the point that overall in capitalism, that, material wealth is only a form of manifestation of abstract wealth. And, or valorization process becomes primary, right? And so it doesn't really matter how much concrete labor did you actually do, how many concrete hours did you actually spend in making that same thing, if the socially necessary labor time that that should be taken to produce that, that is the abstract labor that you actually really did. That becomes the real amount of labor that you did. And maybe you know, for whatever reason, you took way longer concretely. Maybe you were too, focused on the very specific shape of the article that you're producing, or you're very, like your attention to detail, or all of those things. In the end, in the market, none of that matters, right? Or because that market is presupposed, because this society, and this is part of, like, the point that I've been trying to make in the sort of debate with Rudy and I, in the thing, like, it's because the thing is, that's the social, that's the objectivity of the social totality, which is, society, the social being, capitalism, this, phantom totality, essentially, right? Which is like, or this is the big other, right? The big other. Where is the big other? It both, it's not really a real thing out there, but it's more real than, any of us individuals. We are merely moments of its, like, iteration, in a sense,
right?
So yeah.
So maybe I'll ask a couple questions that might put you on. And, I often during these sessions will step away, and I'm listening, obviously. I just want to say that because I will be stepping away at some point here. You've actually made me say I'm for sure going to smoke a cigarette in the next, hour, because I can't just watch you smoke this whole time. I am so easily influenced by whatever I see that I can't watch old movies without then going, all right, now I have to smoke one. Like if there were ever lawsuits of the, the advertising industry for tobacco, then like, I don't know why I didn't get some money back, because, and maybe even at like a discount off the packs of cigarettes would be nice, because they're so expensive now. But, I like to have one or two on hand, and it sucks in the United States. You can't buy them individually, because I would, but in Europe you can, which is wonderful. But okay, before I step away, we've covered a lot of ground. You've covered a lot of ground. So your dad was a communist. You went to college. You joined a student college campus organization. Two things were missing. And there was no real connection between the kind of campus activism and the broader social issues that everyone within that sort of movement obviously espouses. I can definitely relate on that, because I was involved on campus as well. And then I was just, you despair, right? When you see there's no connection here, right? And then there's a hatred of theory. I mean, now you didn't say that, and maybe it's different where you're coming from, but where I'm coming from, there's a hatred of theory. It's absolutely hated. Yeah, you would say that there's a disdain for theory.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, carry on.
Which is why it has to go underground. This is it's forced there. And so everybody, CPI, CPIM, CPIML, CPIN, there's another one that I'm missing that you had brought up that was called CLI. All of these, well, actually, no, all of these except for CLI kind of held this line that, we have to do the bourgeois thing first, which is also intuitive. I think, I've felt this way before. I felt like, wow, like that was Russia's problem. I think a lot of people have this thought, right? It's like, they're trying to skip a few steps. And then, of course, there's like the whole question of like, is this really necessary stages? I mean, maybe there's something special about London at the time. And now are we all going to go through the same kind of historical stages? And obviously that's where someone like Pistone's going to say, like, that's why we got to stop thinking about this as a historical thing. We got to start thinking as this as a logic, right? And so that's where you tuned into Radical Notes, got involved with these people who are saying, nah, man, y'all have missed the actual essence of capitalism itself. And so I guess I have questions then about the line that they hold on imperialism and counter-imperialist struggles. Like, how do they relate to these Maoists? Do these Maoists want to kill them, or do they hide from them? What is, because like in the United States, it's not, say, I don't like Maoists. I think that they're, it's not going to result in anything. No one's going to do anything. You say it in India, it might be a little different. And so there's a little bit more like you had said before we started recording, 200 communist parties in, India. And I said, well, that's like the Indian thing, you got to have the plurality. And then you'd said, well, yeah, when you got over 1 billion people in your country. And I was like, God damn, like I can't comprehend it. I cannot comprehend that many people, and I cannot comprehend that many communisms, and I cannot comprehend that many people caring about communism. Like there's all these things that I just cannot comprehend, and it's because, we're here. But so I wanted to insert this somewhere, and so I'm just going to force it in here. And I just wanted to say, like, to Americans, especially, but also maybe some of our, European, I was going to say users, fucking, I don't want to say, fellow travelers, right? The people in the underground theory scene who are trying to bootstrap themselves into an education on their own, kind of with the help of others on the internet. I've had this sense for a while now that India is a special place when it comes to the development of ideas. Now, there's all kinds of contradictions I hope that we'll tease out here. But why it's special is because it's potentially the last place that there is a literariate. There are literate college students in India, more so than in Europe, more so than in the United States. And when I say literate, I mean like you don't get accepted into higher education in the first world when you're coming from a place like India, when you have not put in the work. Like you in the United States, like, oh, you can get in on your mom and dad's money, or you can go into a lot of debt, and they've lowered the standards so much that they're kind of just walking you through the process and patting you on the head and treating you like a little kid. But my impression with India is like, no, like they're still like hardcore, but it's not like this hardcore kind of like the way that like Japanese students are hardcore. It's like that's a different kind of hardcore education. We're talking about like you have to know your canon, and you have to know the Western canon, and now you know the Marxist canon. That's 3 canons, right? And so most Americans don't have the Western canon alone, and so I think that's, in that sense, I just kind of wanted to elevate you and to say, yeah, no, I'm not going to do it too much. We're not going to, but I just want to say, like, for people who are like, well, why is Dave talking to Sahil so much? Guys, you should be taking notes when Sahil talks. All right. That's why I take it seriously. And I've never met a college student from India who wasn't fucking hardcore. Like the hardest core motherfuckers, dude. Like, absolutely. Like, you guys are this concentrated form of labor power. And it's like, oh, damn, cool. But I've never met one, though. And here's the thing. I've never met one, though, who was this based in Marx. And if they were based in Marx, it was like some post-colonial theory, literary criticism bullshit. And I mean, I'd say, like, I don't want to say that, but I'd say almost all the ones I've met, that is their position. Like, that's where they're coming from. It's Gayatri Spivak, it's Homit K. Baba, and that's it, man. And that they've kind of pitched their tent there at base camp, and they're happy. So I'm curious about why that didn't happen to you. I'm curious about what the Radical Notes position on this post-colonial theory thing is. Seems like it might be related to this idea that we need a bourgeois revolution, right? And then, yeah, I guess I'm just curious about, like, what are the major constitutive contradictions within Radical Notes and between Radical Notes and the broader Indian and world scenes? I know that's a lot of questions, but I can't prop you up like that without giving you a serious challenge. So there you go.
No. For sure. Okay. Yeah. So only in terms of there were a lot of questions. So what do I guess address, first? Like, so Radical Notes is, I guess, and I don't want to only call them, but like, yeah, broadly, our group. It's like, look, we are in capitalism, and it's only intensifying more and more. What we are looking at today is a more and more concrete, always differing and yet maintaining that, constant, right, forms of capitalism. That's what we are looking at. And so imperialism, partly the point really is, it's not that, when Lenin says imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism, oftentimes how we have received that is more in terms of, yeah, so capitalism is now imperialism, and not exactly that, okay, imperialism is still capitalism, you know. And essentially the point being that, okay, imperialism again was a very specific, form in which capitalism is presenting itself, right? But essentially it is still capitalism. And now, so, and what are its fundamental logic? Like, how does, capitalism itself function? That's that we have in a certain sense. The real question always constantly is about trying to understand both the concrete forms that it has already taken, and the tendencies or the directions in which, for the, for its further concrete forms, what are the tendencies that we are looking at right now? Because of course it's all a process, right? Like these capitalism is a process. It's especially its concrete manifestations, that is a process. So part of the task of politics, and this is the task that, Radical Notes, or, our groups like really center on. Part of the task, or what politics itself means, is not simply, yeah, now we have, the true word or whatever, and now it's just about like missionary work, right? Like just spread the word. No, that's not the point. And it's not simply that, oh yeah, because we have the word, because we have the book, so now we know, and now we are educated, and we, spread the word, right? And educate the masses or whatever. No, the question, the Marxist question is, who will educate the educator, right? Which is the point being, okay, how do we even know? And especially, okay, we can always to an extent, know about the past, but even to about the present itself, and the tendencies and the directions and the possibilities that are inherent in this present moment, how do we get to know about those? So part of the task of politics is to learn, to understand, to educate ourselves in this, which is like one of the ways, and how we articulate that is through inquiry, right? Inquiry, which is like organizing itself, always has to be at the same time a form of inquiry, or inquiry itself has to be a mode of, politics, whereby, because there is no, there is no privileged subject, subject supposed to know or anything, right? There's no one, there's no Karl Marx or Poston or any of us, right, who just knows, oh yeah, this guy has the answers, and then we just, oh yeah, just tell us, right? No, it is only the workers, and, this constant process of both labor and its own alienation. But alienation, not in the, again, alienation is another one of those terms which is, massively misunderstood, and just like bothers me to no end. But, alienation precisely in those terms that we were talking about, the living labor becoming dead labor, right? That, like, alienation is this objectification of this abstract phantom objectivity. That is the relation. And so part of politics for, Radical Notes, or for us, is, you know trying to always constantly, in this kind of, it's essentially, these are certain ideas that come out of, the Italian new left, sort of the, 70s Italian, like operaismo, operaista sort of tradition, where the idea was like a couple of ideas. This workers' inquiry was one. The other one along with that was like co-research. What that means is, you basically inquire into the organic composition of capital. You inquire into, how is capital, how are industries, how is the relationship between labor and capital being constituted at the moment, right? You find more and more about that, and that itself already indicates, already presents to us the specific modes and forms of struggles that can be, waged regarding, the present moment, right? And so part of the thing that, we understand is that there is no, just like there's no, there's no trans-historical, even correct form of struggle. It's not that, oh yeah, the historical, early 20th century party form, that, okay, yeah, once, Lenin had, demonstrated, okay, this is the party form, or this is the shape of the, mass organization, or the party, vanguard party that was right for that historical moment. It's not that, okay, yeah, that is the, form of political organization from now on until the end of capitalism or something. No, no. Each historically specific moment requires and forms, necessitates its own kind of, negativity, its own kind of specific form, which will, push against it, which will work to unravel, those contradictions, right? So again, part of the question of politics, or organizing, or inquiry, is also to inquire into the specific forms of resistance, or specific forms of, yeah, workers' organizations, like of how, what are the forms in which we can fight against capitalism, right? And so, yeah, I mean, one I guess answer in terms of where we find ourselves would be this. Now, of course, this already brings us into, um, sort of a debate, fight, whatever, like, contradiction with other, communist groups. For them, for specifically the ones that we've already mentioned, for them, the answer, at least in terms of, how, what is the political form in which, or through which we are going to fight against capitalism, that's already given. It's the party form. It's the very specific historical party form that we are still, like, that is the correct party form, right? So there, on that question, we're already at odds. Then there are, questions about capitalism and how we understand capitalism, and, even what we understand by the proletariat, or, all of these questions. So, I mean, yeah, those are some of the things, I guess, we can, but I guess I've already partly forgotten the list of questions that were they posed. But
So it is very interesting that there are, or that at least it seems to be, like, in contrast to the prospect of being a communist in America. Now, I don't know from firsthand experience, because I didn't have a college, I didn't have a PMC family, and that just wasn't in the cards for me as a young person. But from my perspective, the most radical people here in America that are going to go and take the PMC track, and still, proudly proclaim to be Marxists, really are nothing but, very kind, big-hearted liberals. But it does seem to be the case that, at least on the ground in India, maybe the Marxisms there are a little bit more serious. But you've kind of demonstrated, or explained, that ultimately they're not really doing what needs to be done if we really want to get out of the pickle that we all find ourselves in. It still manages to be really performative, really kind of symbolic, and really, let's just toe the line, let's do this. Whereas you and your colleagues and your comrades really do seem to be concerned with figuring out the conditions, the current conditions, what's going on right now. The fact that you may be uniquely situated to see things differently. You mentioned neo-feudalism, techno-feudalism. I love that. I think it's great. And I don't think it's a problem. Like, it's not a problem. Yeah. it is still capital. Like all this is still
Right.
happening because of capital. The fact that you guys seem hip to that, and you seem like you want to take that, head on, that's the boss battle that you want to fight. It seems to distinguish you from these 200 other groups who want to just read all the right books, and get all the accolades, and I don't know, and do the thing.
Yeah. I want to say really quick, just as a pedantic maneuver, but I know that some people are pulling their hair out because you said that most Marxists in the US are liberals. We at Theory Underground have been holding the line that when we speak and we use the word liberal, unless we're going to specify that we mean this in its classical sense, we're using the word the way Americans use the word. Okay. Now I know that that's not cool on LeftTube. Everybody on LeftTube's entire identity has formed by being the progressive who hates liberals. But I think there's so many problems with that. One of the biggest red flags is that they associate being liberal with civility and ability to actually engage in contradictions, at an intellectual level. And they just associate that with liberalism. And it's and then they go liberals, and then they go, and it's just their idea is you get out of being a liberal by being extreme. You get out of being a liberal by being more radical. And it's cool, man. But anyway, I just had to throw that in there because we're talking about progressives when we say that. And there's, hey, the world would be a sad, poorer place without progressives, but it would also be a sad, poorer place without conservatives, because now I'm using these words in a way that means actual psychological tendencies, value prioritizations, things that are decided prior to theory, things that are could be potentially genetic. We don't know at this point, guys. And so there's so much stuff that goes into, Nance is laughing at that, but Malcolm Collins, who I'm bringing on the 22nd, does think that, well, he cites study after study after study that show genetic correlations, between
genetic preponderances. Yeah.
And so it's just and then of course we could always say, well, oh yeah, but look at this person that came out of this family that was so conservative and now they're so progressive. And then you go, yeah, but that's also just people need to think psychoanalytically, right? The kind of progressive that I am or was coming from a very conservative home is different than a kind of progressive that comes from a progressive home. I don't have a family anymore is kind of what that means. It's I'm not sitting here at the Thanksgiving table trying to push my parents further left. I'm not sitting at the Thanksgiving table anymore. There's a difference here, but that's a whole other thing. Or if I am sitting there, I'm this outcast that, that it's a whole other thing. So but I have a great relationship with my parents now. Don't worry about it, everybody.
I love them. They're lovely people. Genuinely.
Lovely people. Yeah. The mainstream media is not sending its best when it comes to representations of people that are associated with my parents. All right. So Stahil, I asked a whole bunch of questions. You gave this great response. It was a series of responses. One of them was a response to the question about contradictions. And you were saying that one of the big contradictions that you all have is what again? You were kind of closing out on that. It was a party form, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And so, intuitively, it just makes sense that if you think we have not understood capitalism and we're not exactly sure about its current manifestation without thinking it through and working it out with each other, then the prescription itself could change. The actual, the prescription is dependent on the diagnosis, right? I guess, so when I had said there's constitutive contradictions within Radical Notes and outside of it, I guess what I mean is what are the main debates that have occurred within Radical Notes, and or what are because maybe Radical Notes was something else before it split, and the split was caused by, because that's the thing. It's like you take any church, any club, any society, like there's always some kind of a contradiction. And then people on the outside might say, oh, that's purely scholastic. It doesn't actually matter. And it's like, no, usually these matter in like a very real sense. Like, and so I'm just curious if you're all pretty much in lockstep on a variety of issues, and there's not a major contradiction within the Radical Note space, because you're all just kind of like, you appreciate each other so much, in contrast to how you are treated by everyone else outside of this group. So is it pretty like uniform, or do you have like your own internal, or did you have internal debates that were or are still alive and well?
Yeah, okay. So the thing is, partly, I guess, the status of the group at present, as against, in previous whatever times, is that a major part of the group is no longer part of the group, but not because of any very explicit, direct, like ideological, like in those terms, like debates or reasons like that. Partly simply because a lot of people moved to different places. And so, for example, me, like I'm no longer, like physically there. And so my engagement, for example, directly with the group, which, still like the part of the group that still carries on there, is very, very minimal. Like it's, only through, it's not an actual, working relationship in terms of, okay, like those guys are continually, thinking about politics in their, both, physical and, whatever organizational space broadly, right? Like in Delhi, India, whatever, right? But so, okay, their iteration at the moment, it's no longer Radical Notes, for example, one. Like Radical Notes as Radical Notes, like I'm not even sure exactly when it sort of stopped as such in a certain, like in its own form, but like it was, I guess, somewhere around 2017, 2018, maybe something around that. But like I sort of left before that. So the ones that continue over there at the moment, they are called City Notes at the moment. They have like some of the things that I sent you, like that's their newer stuff. But yeah, within that, I guess, like in terms of, internal debates or whatever, it's more about different places that we find ourselves in, different sort of, local specific conditions that we find ourselves in. And partly we haven't been, as good with maintaining, I suppose, a constant, interaction, given partly like, so it's mostly with the people that are no longer there. Like the people that are there, they are still, at it. But others, a lot of us who are no longer there, we are going through our own sort of crises, if you want,
Right.
Because, partly because we are, it's difficult. Like we cannot really, constantly neither depend on, the people who are there, nor like it's not even that kind of that big of an organization that we could, have like that we would become a chapter or something of, an international whatever organization. It's not even
there. That wouldn't. There's so many reasons that wouldn't work, but one of them is that there's not the conditions of possibility for being able to have a milieu like this arise aren't in any other countries. I'm gonna assert that. Maybe someone could be like, actually, and I would love to hear about it. Do let me know. But from what I understand, that there's the conditions are not there. But also, so then I want to talk about those conditions of possibility a little bit. So, were you all students?
Not all. Like
how many of you were like in the profession of teaching, either high school or as professors at university?
Oh, like mostly yes, mostly related to schools or colleges or like within the education sector. Most of us, absolutely.
Okay, and then most. I know this is like fast time. So then, how many of you were in the same city?
Most of us.
Okay, so that is, I mean,
yeah.
So these are all just like, I could deduce these from the actual, just like, well, that would have to be that way. And, you know, Carl Jaspers is great on in the idea of the university for saying, like, a school of thought or a real intellectual milieu, it doesn't ever come within the calcified institution. If it does, it's usually kind of in resistance against that institution that it's inside of, right? But it's usually kind of like right outside, you know, inside outside. Frankfurt School was inside outside, you know, as an example. And so anyway, that I love the fact that this existed. Now, I want to do a check-in with each of you before I ask a bunch more questions. So, Nancy, got anything on any of that?
So I think the fact it seems that it's more realistic to be a serious Marxist, I guess, in India, in your world. The fact that, I don't know, like, are the institutions welcoming to like these communist parties and these radical Marxist groups, or is it still kind of like frowned upon?
Well, okay. Look, I mean, the conditions are very different today than when I was back there. Even in between, like, things have really changed, like, especially within, you know, universities and all, especially. Like, yeah, it's not, I mean, when I was there, yeah, didn't, like, I mean, not only that it didn't matter that you were, you know, whatever you're calling yourself, Marxist, communist, Maoist, whatever, not only that I mean, Maoist, sure, that was still, you could not really call yourself that for that's been a while. But, like, broadly, you know, leftist, Marxist, communist, all of that, it's all cool. Within the university space, every other guy is, you know, some kind of a, right? That was not really a problem to an extent. Now, not so much. But yeah, I mean, yeah, I sort of lost the thread. That's all you asked? You asked something else too, I feel.
It's so I guess I was curious if it was like an overt thing that everybody was like happy and it was like, yay, we're happy to be here, but also like it still seems like you had to reach outside the institution to get anything really accomplished.
So part of that thing is basically it's sort of actually in a certain sense similar to the US, in the sense that, you know, like in the US, like, you know, if you hear Jordan Peterson, you know, universities are the centers of, you know, they are dominated by, you know, postmodern neo-Marxists or whatever, right? Like, this is the hub of all these radicals and all of that. So in a certain sense, and which honestly, like, partly it is true. I mean, we can debate about, okay, no, they are not real Marxists or whatever, but, like, sure, you know, like, in the university spaces, like, majority are like liberals or radical liberals or something or the other, right? Like anarchists or whatever. Like, everybody's, you know, they're, you know, some kind of a radical, one way or the other, right? In India, it was like that. Like, in universities, I mean, okay, not really in the majority. Like, not to say that the majority, like, numerically, not the majority of the students were all leftists or anything. No, but the vocal majority, the, you know, the more active ones, the ones engaged in any sense in politics, in any sense really, they were mostly, yes, they were all like various kinds of, you know, communists or Marxists and everything. And that was almost like, oh, if you are in, you know, in the university or something and you're not one, then what are you even, you know, doing? Almost like, if you're you know, if you are at all interested in any sense in politics or something, then you're obviously some kind of a, right? Like, that was, and in fact, like, one of the universities which was opened in like 1970s, early 70s or late 60s, like, that was like practically like dominated, ruled by, you know, various leftist student organizations. Like, because like, we in India, in universities, most of the time we have like student elections. Like, there are, you know, student organizations, they contest elections, and there's the student union, which, you know, then they, whatever, they decide on a lot of things. They engage with the, you know, university administration. They sort of co-administer in certain ways the university campus. And so there's one of the universities, that one, like historically since its foundations, was since always the winning, the sort of ruling whatever organization was always either the student organization of like one of the communist parties. It was always like. And so that campus was throughout always the hub, the center of radical leftist whatever student politics. But then at the same time it would often like one of the critiques of them, which is like semi true, semi like bullshit also, which was like yeah, so precisely the university basically captured all the people. They're like, yeah, you have too much radical energy or whatever, let's give you a space, then you guys can just like circle jerk whatever there, play radicals and play campus politics, and so that we can like the country can carry on as it wants outside of it, instead. So partly it was like that, and to an extent you can even say, yeah, so academia was definitely dominated by most professors or whatever. Most of them were leftists of various kinds. And however, this is where partly that other side comes in, at least in the academic intellectual field. The dominant ones for at least 3 decades maybe have now since then been the most post-colonial and subaltern studies, like those kinds of like leftists whatever. But yeah,
I just I don't want to sound like an asshole, but I think that's kind of captured that tendency has kind of captured a lot of the otherwise radical potential. And it's safe for me to say that from my position, being who I am and where I live. But I think recently there's been an uptick in kind of reactionary politics in India. I don't know what it's like on the ground, but it does seem like there's been so much work done that ultimately amounts to what I would call identity politics in a way, and not to belittle it, because there's a lot of that is to be taken seriously, that does matter, that is important. But it also does kind of seem like we've seen this happen before. We've seen, the performative politics really do nothing but generate reactionary politics in response to that stuff. And I don't know. If you have anything to say about that, I would be interested to hear.
Like, look, we on the question of identity politics, like on the one hand, yeah, absolutely, we can go into it, at some point in more detail. But what I would, in very brief and very like cursory, I guess, sort of way for now, or what I would say is like identity politics is just the other side of capitalist, like the logic of capital, which is and this is again like rigorously thinking in terms of capital. Look, and this is all I'll say just for now. Human beings, workers, whatever, all human beings, irrespective of if we call them, oh yeah, that guy is a worker and that guy is not, blue collar or whatever, or whatever. No, all human beings within capitalism exist. Their fundamental basic mode of existence is that of a commodity. Before we are anything else, we are labor power, right? Now some are labor powers who have direct access to private ownership of means of production, so they can do well, right? Other labor powers don't have, what the fuck, man, again, Jesus. Other labor powers don't have access to that, so thereby they become workers or proletariats, right? But fundamentally, everybody's labor power, a commodity. Now, there are two sides to a commodity, or to the logic of the commodity, which are fundamental. And they are a dialectical opposite, which is they need to be both, they need to be commensurable, but they need to be commensurable with difference. In the sense, just like the commodities, as we were looking at in the first chapter, right? A commodity both needs to have in its essence a commensurable, quality, which is value, right? So abstract labor allows various different sensuously different concrete objects to be exchanged, right? That basic things forms the fundamental logic of their society, their community. But you cannot exchange a coat with a coat. You can only exchange a coat with linen, or a coat with something else or something else. In concrete forms, there needs to be difference. Now what we almost forget, we forget, is human beings are also, they are also under the same logic, the logic of commodities. Now, on the one hand, just like with the commodity, there is the dual character, right? With the commodity labor power, there's also the dual character, which is, on the one hand, we are all the same. We are all abstract labor. We are all the sources of abstract labor. We can all, so fundamentally, we are all exchangeable. We are all fungible. We don't like our whatever specificity, our singularities don't really matter within capitalism. But at the same time, and so one of the forms in which this manifests, one of the concrete forms in which this abstract logic manifests itself, is the general universal sort of homogenization of labor. But not only of homogenization of labor, de-skilling, call it, massification, call it, there are various names for this, right? But a general de-skilling, but also a general homogenization at the level of culture, maybe also, right? But at the same time, there is a necessary imposition, a need for difference within human beings, right? And more so, because now the levels of homogenization that have been happening with the higher organic composition of capital, which implies at the same time a higher organic composition of capital means there is a de-skilling of labor happening, right? That now labor is no longer even required to be skilled labor. No, we can pay less precisely because it has been de-skilled, right? So the other side of the logic of de-skilling is, now in terms of culture, or any kind of socio-cultural identities, people need to be different. People are sort of almost required to be different, and this also functions in a certain way in this subjective disposition where, no, you need to assert your difference, because qualitatively, if you don't seem to be different, then why are you as a commodity, why should you be bought and not the other commodity, right? So there is at the same time within human beings, and especially more so today, because there is a further very clear homogenization happening, that there's at the subjective level, there's a more clear assertion of different identities. No, we have this other quality, we have this, we bring this other thing to the whatever, like, so for me, like, the logic of identity, and especially in the past, like, basically along with neoliberalism, what we see, like, this is the epoch when we have seen the emergence of all forms of identities, the absolute proliferation of social identities. The reason for that is precisely because this is the moment when like this is when that almost necessitates this kind of an attitude, like, I mean, Stewart,
this goes really well with Baudrillard, right? Because this he talks about differentiation, but it's all of it's like hyper differentiation, but it's to mask a fundamental homogeneity, right? Which is, I think, I don't know, I don't want to say that as a white dude in America, I've got a special standpoint on this, but I just think, yeah, nobody's so special. Like, none of us are so special. And so when people are like, oh, it's time that we're special, it's like, bitch, none of us were ever fucking special. We're getting eaten up and shit out. We're not special. And then people are like, well, it's easy for you to say because your time is bye-bye. And it's like, I kind of doubt that any of my ancestors ever thought they were white. I really actually doubt that. This is some fucking Yankee shit. This is some fucking Yankee American bullshit. My fucking Polish potato farmer ancestors weren't fucking like, oh, we're white people and we feel so represented by the nation state. You know what I mean? But and I'm also, imported goods. I'm an immigrant. I'm a fucking anchor baby, for my parents. Like, I mean, okay, that's an exaggeration. They came in from Canada. They didn't have to, I was their kind of like first child in the United States. And so for me, it's like, yeah, I don't come from like a lineage of Americans who've been through like this, where like, yeah, no, you actually might have like some grandparents who were slave owners or like descendants of slave owners, and maybe they were racist or something like that. And I didn't come into a situation like a neighborhood, for instance, like some neighborhood that's had like racial issues because they're excluding people deliberately for a long time or whatever. So yeah, with all that out of the way, it's just like, yeah, but I just squint my eyes a little bit and all I see is a bunch of dumb fuck Americans. And then a handful of them are like, no, but we're special. And we're special because X, Y, or Z identity things. And then I'm like, cool, but how's that going to change, like, substantially? How's that going to change anything? And now, I wasn't like that when I was in college. I was very careful because I wanted to be a good progressive, right? And so I was like, at the point that someone hystericized me and was like, oh, you're trying to start a DSA chapter. Well, how many black people do you have? How many women do you have? Like, oh shit, you're right. I'm trying to do a DSA chapter. I better actually go and try to do outreach. The people who hystericized me did nothing to actually bring in more so-called diversity. But I started going to all these meetings for like these different clubs on campus where people get together on the basis of these things. Dude, there was no room for me to recruit. Like, they don't want that. They want you to take notes, shut up, listen. And of course I did. And eventually it gets repetitive, right? Like, I would have loved to learn some actual like history. I would have loved to learn some actual theory. But I pretty much just now have like a very strong impression of like 3 people's opinions. Those people like to talk a lot. The other 15 to 30 people who would show up didn't really talk a lot. And so, cool, like that's what I gained from that situation. And now I'm supposed to understand the experience of the people in that group when I know that a lot of the people in the group didn't like the people who talked a lot. So, I feel like it's easiest for people to kind of go along with this stuff when it's just all online and it's all at the level of explicit, like what is said. And they don't think about like in the actual concrete meat space with the other people there, how many people aren't talking and how many people aren't into it and how many people aren't feeling represented and how often they don't come or how much they gripe about each other when it comes to essential ideological things. And so it's like, yeah, the homogeneity of like this intersectional checkbox list of like line items people have to check off is an online thing. But of course, there's not an activist who's not online. And so then it's also very much like in these spaces, right?
Yeah.
That's my experience. Nancy's already said he didn't really have that experience of going through the college situation like that. My big question, well, I've got a couple. How long do you have here?
I mean, it's Saturday night,
Yeah, like, this is my Saturday night. We don't want to be up late again because Nance and I, we did that Levinas thing the other day, and that was like 5 hours, and we were like, it doesn't matter, we're gonna go as long as we have to. And then I was sitting on my floor like at 3 a.m. winding down, and I was just like, I'm not gonna be asleep till at least 4, and that fucks you up when you're old. So
yeah.
Like Nance, no, I'm just kidding. We're both there now. Yeah. So let's see if we've got a little time. There's the labor aristocracy. There's the post-colonial scene. There's the anti-imperialist struggle. These are all related, but they're different. And in fact, they might be so different. In certain cases, it causes splits in certain organizations, right? From the American standpoint, where everybody was saying you got to read Settlers back in 2020, it kind of all seems the same to me, because at the end of the day, they're not going to listen to me. They're not going to hear me. We're not going to be able to engage at the level of ideas. I'm just a white settler, and if I don't just sit here and do perpetual self-flagellation for the rest of my life, then I'm fucked. but I think that there's always some actual kernel of truth in the heart of these kinds of issues. And so on the settlers question, because it's obviously everyone, every progressive, NPR progressive at this point is, oh, settler colonialism. I'm curious, like, what the radical notes line, and maybe you've developed since then, but like, what was the radical notes line on the issues of labor aristocracy, post-colonial theory, and anti-imperialist struggle? And then you can kind of maybe say how those things relate and are different.
Okay, yeah. Look, regarding labor aristocracy, like, weird as this may sound, like, we did not talk much about that. Like,
Okay.
this wasn't, and yeah, I haven't also on my own not really gone much into that. I mean, in a certain sense, maybe one way to put this could actually be that what we see in terms of, post-colonial, like, a certain domination of the post-colonial or decolonial or all these kinds of, discourses, like, what underlies them is a certain kind of, I don't know, PMC or like labor aristocracy or these, they, the logic essentially that underlies these positions, the way I see it, is the logic of, late capitalism or, neoliberal movement of capitalism, where it ends up basically being this kind of a politics of, it's no longer really about, a total transformation of society, which includes, value labor itself, because labor, it is the historically, specific form, but rather essentially, yeah, we have been, like, the whole logic ends up being about, representation or recognition, or a certain, mode in which some of us, essentially, yeah, it's basically the radical core of labor, as it can be, in the sense, like, labor as the negativity. Not labor as abstract labor being the standpoint of labor, not in that sense, but labor as the essentially the negative element, which is in the center of, the whole cycle of capital, which is both its, precondition, but also its moment of rupture, which can, like, the only thing that can undo it. It's basically all of these discourses are a kind of an ossification, reification of the potentialities of some kind of a discourse or a movement of labor. That's what these are. Like, they end up being, so in specific historical moments, when a certain, concrete form of radical labor, or in a specific historical moment when labor took a concrete historical form, which was, for example, okay, third world colonial countries or colonial, peoples or whatever, who were struggling, and in that moment their struggles were real, precisely because they were an expression of the struggle of labor against capital in its, imperialistic, whatever, imperialist moment, right? But what ends up happening is that historical form of the contradiction of labor and capital changes, that moves away, but in our consciousness retains those specific concrete forms of, labor's reaction, and essentially ossifies it into something inherently radical, right? So all these identities whereby, yeah, whatever, like, the identity of any concretely oppressed people, without saying any names, whatever, but like, yeah, like, I don't know, Indians are no longer even, I mean, at least I don't see, the Indian identity as one of the whatever oppressed identities or something, but maybe, some people, but like, or yeah, but these things end up becoming, oh yeah, somehow there is something inherently radical about, a certain identity, right? Like, that's the logic it ends up taking in these discourses. The problem is, I mean, for me, the Marxist position would be to see, even when we look at history, even in those historical moments when they were really concretely, they were, radical in some way. The point to read that history is to see what made that specific ethnicity or a specific, race or a specific gender or something radical in that moment. What was it about, that historical moment and the specific positionality or whatever, what was the relational, moment in which that identity found itself that allowed it to be radical, and how come today it really is not? Where and even though, because we have the memory of their radical, movements, we take them to be somehow essentially inherently, something radically for all time, right? I mean, this is essentially.
And then you combine that with what you just said earlier about identity politics and about the need for this differentiation, and you see how like the beautiful memory of that radical, struggle, which was real, combines very conveniently with the sad postmodern subject who's like, yes, I found my meaning and my mission,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So no, not only, but also because in neoliberalism needs, or whatever, capitalism in its, late, whatever this phase, it requires identities today, so that, labor power as commodity competes against each other. If need be, do away with some, because we are also facing one of the consequences of, one of the consequences of the homogenization of labor power is also a lot of the labor power, a lot of the commodity labor power becomes superfluous, right? If there's so much of this commodity and it's not really needed anymore, so it becomes superfluous. So now we have overproduction of a certain commodity, and so it's also disposable, right? So now this commodity will more and more aggressively fight in the marketplace to be, represented, to be put on the front shelf, right, against the other commodity. But we don't want to think of ourselves that way. We don't want to think of ourselves as commodities or whatever. So we don't even think about, and this is the moment where essentially the symbolic order, the big other, disappears, right? And this is also our postmodern, one of the, qualities of our postmodern moment, where there's the disappearance of, the grand narratives or whatever, right? The social totality has sort of disappeared, and we just find ourselves just, like floating sort of subjects, right? We don't no longer even know where we are positioned, what our position is, right? So we have to come up with meaning for our own lives. We have to come up with, meaning of, me as an individual to this social collectivity and everything. And so where else? And we no longer find it in, or these are the solutions, these are the only options that are left. Either you find meaning in work, right? And so you make your work your whole identity, right? The logic of entrepreneurship, right? What is it like? I mean, I remember in the, undergrad days or like high school time, there used to be this one quote, whatever, would circulate on Facebook or whatever, which was like, um, make what you love, or make your hobbies into your job, and you won't work a day in your life, or something like that,
Yeah.
right? I mean, that what that is basically, yeah, like, your moment of life, your moments of living, you have to commodify life itself, all aspects of your life, right? And that's the only way you can both find meaning in this, in the present condition, and because there is no other social totality, there's no, like, the classic old, big other, which was the bourgeoisie or the bourgeois society, right? The boss. Now the boss is gone. The boss now is an abstract, algorithm. So now who do you like? Who is even ruling over you? Nobody, right? You're your own boss now, right? So in this kind of a situation, what else do you do, right? You have to assert in that moment your identity. And so this is the moment where both the present structure of, capitalism as it exists in this moment, and all these past struggles, which were real struggles, they end up coming together very well, too well, right? In this moment, so all of those struggles that were fought in previous times, but because they always end up, you can only articulate them with the material that you have at hand, right? So whatever you're oppressed in that moment, identity or whatever was, that became your, rallying point, right? But today, that works very well for neoliberal capitalism. And for us, oh yeah, we retain, the tradition or the, inheritance of that struggle, but without its radical core, essentially, So, yeah.
So the question about labor aristocracy and post-colonial theory and anti-imperialist struggle as sort of a well, okay, I kind of want to bracket a couple of things here. I kind of want to come back to those. I kind of wanted to use that as like the sort of preface to like this other question that I just have at like and this is about you, I guess. And that's kind of why I'd led with like my experience going through the university system. And then like, of course, it's identity politics and all of this stuff when I'm trying to do like working class organizing. And then after the fact, it's like when the Bernie campaign in 2020 just falls out from under everybody. And then everyone's like, gotta read settlers. Oh, you got a problem with that? You're labor aristocracy, right? Like this whole thing. That was disillusioning, because it really felt like people were kind of realizing, oh, at bottom though, we're all working, right? Like that's fact, and so people forget how radical Bernie actually, not as a person, not as a program, but as a symbol, like actually was. Like the symbol was, look, we actually haven't identified as working class in this country until now. And now all of a sudden, all these other candidates are having to try to pretend like they somehow ever cared. And then, of course, like I was like working around all these Marxists who are like, oh, but he's not revolutionary and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, and I've had the same position from then till now, which is just like, duh. But you think you can kind of jump the step of people realizing they're workers? You think you can somehow leap over that? It's not going to happen. Of course, they want to go from, oh, people just heard about Bernie, now let's roll out Lenin. Setting aside the fact that that's probably not a solution. It probably doesn't, it's a square they're trying to fit into a round hole or whatever, Okay, but disillusionment and a sort of resistance that you meet when you're trying to do this working class organizing and or theorizing. And so that's my question, is coming through the university system in first India, now in the United States. What are the similarities and differences between these two countries and the kind of resistance that you face moving through these spaces, really? Because what you're talking about is heretical. It goes against the whole thing. You practically agree with Jordan Peterson. You're like, this is kind of the situation, So yeah, what do you just keep a low profile, or have you met resistance? And what's the difference between these two scenes, US and India?
Yeah, no. So see, in India, it was like, so, the identity side of things was in certain ways was only just coming up, like in India, for the longest time, it was, or maybe not exactly though, like in practice, really, in India also for a long time, the practice of even the dominant communist parties has really just been another iteration of the identity form of politics. So in India, like the communists have been lost really for a long time because for one, I mean, we were never really, we never even got to capitalism, right? Because we were still, semi-colonial and semi-feudal. So we didn't have a, proletariat to be, organizing. And now the first world. So on the one hand, we were just catching up to the first world, right? We never had a working class, whereas, they had one, right? And then by the time it would start to maybe seem in the last 20, 30 years that, okay, maybe, yeah, now we've sped it up. We're, going extra hard into capitalism, neoliberalism and all of that. And then suddenly instead of that, what we have today is, all of these other kinds of identities, or those kinds of oppressions are becoming more and more visible. So in practice in India, for the longest time, really, it was okay. The Communist Party itself would, on the one hand, we would organize, the trade unions, right? Like labor unions, which are, factory workers, the formal industrial working class, which is about, like formal labor in India is like a very low percentage. Majority of it exists as informal, labor, right? And which itself presents its own difficulties in terms of organizing it, right? Like regular, classic whatever Fordist industries, those are relatively easier to organize. On the other hand, like the informal, very small, like 10 people, 20 people, workshops, like that becomes way harder to organize. On the one hand, there was that. We had, those things organized. On the other hand, all organizing was based around, a women's, whatever faction, lower caste, like, or caste based, sort of factions or whatever, right? Ethnicity, identity, linguistic, or, different socio-cultural markers. Like in practice, we were already organizing in those forms, like the communist parties and all, right? But in the past few, so the really, and which is why, again, one of my reasons for insisting on, why understand capitalism as the constant underneath all these changes, is precisely because in India, partly it was like, we never had capitalism, and now we are already moving past it. Like what's going on, like did we ever even have true capitalism, and will we then even ever really fight for true socialism or whatever? Like what's going on there, right? So the resistance, in some sense, that I could say in India was, earlier it was about, like how do we center, how do we center struggle against capitalism in a space like India. That was already difficult because it was like, okay, no, before capitalism becoming a real problem for us, the problem is more the feudal, remnants or whatever, and it's whose concrete form of manifestation we see in the face of fascism, right? Hindutva, right wing, Indian fascism. And so, well, the struggle against capital can take a backseat, and first we need to focus on protecting the minorities in India and fight against, the threat of right-wing Hindu, whatever, fascism, which, and thereby, so we need to align with the centrist Congress party, the center left, whatever, that party. And so we cannot really become an alternative as a socialist alternative or something against capitalism, because we need to first focus on this fight, right? And then, so on the one side, this is what would happen. And then in the last few years that I was there, and then it was also, the, post-colonial theory explicitly, or, all the other kinds of identities, and essentially already a critique of traditional Marxism or class reductionist Marxism or whatever, all of that was already too seeped in. So at that point, it was like, all of that stuff is already, kind of over. What we need to think around today is like, whatever, some kinds of broad coalitions of, various minorities, oppressed, groups and everything, and how we can fight against the threat of fascism, which, like the current government has been here for 10 years more now, right? And so it's like we're in no place, right? Okay, so that was sort of in India. And for us there, it was always about, okay, how do we, but like, where is capitalism? How do we, center the questions of capitalism, or how do we understand all of this weird stuff, which does not seem to be like, has nothing to do with capitalism. It's just, people's whatever retrograde modes of thinking or whatever, that is what's imposing, right? And part of the problem with that is that, okay, if we are Marxist or something, where's the materialist analysis or whatever? This sounds like idealism that we are thinking. The problem is coming because people have, stupid thoughts or something, stupid notions about, their own identities or whatever, but we have no concrete analysis of why are people thinking this way, right, in this moment. Okay, so that was there. In the US, so
it actually sounds like that was unifying, and it gave you solidarity and a sort of sense of fraternity with the radical notes guys. The fact that you guys were like, where's the actual radical shit? It ain't here, but you had each other to talk to. And so that kind of, it made it for a better thing in a sort of sense. Yeah. But then you came here. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was partly, in a certain sense, sad part, the I no longer have, that whatever group or community or whatever. But I would, but at the same time, I'm a, say, political realist or whatever, because like I as an individual, whatever individuated subject, I cannot really decide everything in my life. I end up wherever. Okay, doesn't matter the terrain. You can't choose your terrain of struggle, right? You're thrown wherever. You understand the terrain there, and you try to make sense of things. Okay, how do we, and that's the whole point, right? So okay, I mean, and there is no, I mean, for me, no, there is no outside of capitalism. We are in it wherever geographically we may be located. The point is to understand the specific local, concrete forms in which the struggle is manifested there, right? So here I'm like, all right, let's try something, what's going on. But obviously the dominant, most radicals or activists or whatever here, at least in terms of their understandings of things, they come precisely from that kind of position, right? For them, I mean, we are today, our dominant milieu is, we are children of the 70s, the 60s and 70s. Basically, it's all various kinds of, the proletariat is dead, working class politics doesn't work anymore. What we need to be looking at are various oppressed identities, and center those problems. And so most of the circles have been more like that here. I try in whatever way I can to sort of do my own interventions in very limited sort of ways, but yeah, like it's mostly like that. And yeah, I don't have very concrete solutions or examples, at least from my own experience here, of okay, how we can do things differently. I'm still like trying in my own ways.
But are you an outcast in the department that you work in, or do you just keep a low profile?
So partly I do keep a low profile. Like at certain point I realized, because I've been here for a while now. So, at the beginning I was like, okay, I'm just gonna, jump in and try to like jump in to a flow of things which already has a certain flow and certain direction, right? Which is different from what I would ideally, or, like, I mean, but like there's no way, like I can't just stand on the side and just be throwing like critiques at whatever things and expect somehow things would change. So you need to jump in and then try something. So I did that, but then there was only so much.
Does that mean you got involved with some Bernie activism in 2017?
No, that was too early. I just got here back then.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, but like,
I guess and even then I'm like, okay, I think, yeah, it would have been too late in 2017 anyway. But the point is like, if you're coming in around that time, things were more generally optimistic. Like there was a higher tide for sure, right? Yeah, like so. But so you came in and there was like, oh, this is going on, lots of things going on, right?
Yeah. So
okay.
I mean, so on the ground, at least where I'm located, there was mostly just grad union organizing happening, or very specific kinds of anarchist, or like other kinds of, which was those people were more focused on housing issues, or eviction defense, or mutual aid, those kinds of things. Like, I mean, all important stuff, but for one, everything very like dispersed, like everything like almost disconnected from each other. But for me, I was like, I am located in the university, primarily in terms of what I work, where I work, and even where I'm living. And so it was like, okay, union, whatever, labor organizing, that's sort of what I jumped in primarily. But then I tried, because obviously even there, most of the people that are even trying to organize labor in that sense on campus, in terms of their ideas, they are also coming from, they're reading Settlers or, those kinds of things, right? So where again you find a kind of a mismatch, and how do you articulate both of these problems together? Like, how do you understand, identity and all of those problems and labor, right? Like, so I would, yeah, to whoever, were more active lead organizers or whatever. So with them, like, I had a good relationship, a critical kind of a, they would listen to me, but also they would do their thing, you know, more in that kind of a way. But like, I mean, I tried to, what else, like, organize some reading groups and, do some of those things with some of the more active people, also try to engage with them at, these levels, pose some of these questions. Okay, how do we think about, yeah, like capitalism, racial capitalism, whatever, like, because partly I can only also begin from where the others at, right? Like, I can't just also just drop in something from the outside, from a very different context or whatever. So yeah, so it's a mix of, I guess I would say, mix of a low profile, but a low profile engagement. I don't know. That's
okay. So it doesn't sound like it's like you have people are like, oh, this fucking Sahil sucks, like it's you're a likable guy. You also, you are not from the United States, and so and so you do also fit the bill in terms of like so it's like, if anyone's gonna, if they're reading Settlers and they're just like, oh yeah, like well, then they have to listen to you in a sort of sense, right? They actually have to take you seriously, and so that's nice. Kind of working out in your favor.
yeah.
But I guess I'm curious then about going back to, so post-colonial theory, anti-imperialist struggle. These are two separate things. And maybe when people are doing literary criticism and, they're doing Gayatri Spivak shit, like they think, oh yeah, this is anti-imperialist struggle. But okay, no, there's anti-imperialist struggle that is actual, people hiding out in the woods or the jungle or whatever, like, and they're doing actual, like, military combat, like all kinds of stuff like that. And then there's parliamentary Congress style, like trade agreement kinds of struggles. I'm curious about, like, what are the main ways that it manifests still. And well, actually, shit, we got to actually ask a different question first. I want to go there, so don't let me forget we're going there. But on the question of imperialism, what has been so far the line? Like, so Lenin said capitalism is the highest, imperialism is the highest stage of capitalism. And just, can you give us a quick refresher on what the Radical Notes line on imperialism is versus what everybody kind of thinks about imperialism? And then I'll bring back this question about how these actual forms of resistance manifest.
Mm-hmm. Okay, look, the thing is, today imperialism, yeah, I hesitate in saying too much about that, because the way I see it, we don't really talk in those terms much anymore. It's not really, I mean, how do we understand imperialism today? It's not simply, American imperialism, America as, or whatever, like NATO as the center, whatever. It's capital, first of all, right? How these are specific historical, centers of concentration of capital, and which, like, specific countries and their alliances that have taken lead, in, yeah, they are dominated by capital, right? Or from the side of capital. And but that's no longer, I mean, you look at India today. On the one hand, it's like, is India even, capitalist at all or whatever? But on the other side, like, in the region, India is an imperialist, power for its own region, right? Like, I mean, so it's again, it's no longer like that simple of a, okay, NATO or like the Western Bloc or whatever as an imperialist, thing which people need to fight. No, it's a more dispersed struggle. It's no longer so again, because which is partly why, like, I at least like to center capital as opposed to, imperialism in that sense, because that oppression is within the imperial core too. The
Okay.
oppression.
This is kind of what I thought you were going to say, but I did want to bring it back as a refresher for everybody, because a lot of people, these are new ideas, or at least new takes on ideas that they have formed habits of thinking about. Okay. And so now, I in the same way that we say we got to give the devil, his due, there's something to these struggles. And we say this about, the struggles of women, the struggles of, ethnic minorities. I want to, like, because I don't bring this up very often on this channel, right? Like I think I dropped a video that I was saying that I liked Vivek Chibber and something he said or whatever at one point, and some people might have seen that. But the fact is it's not been like a strong like emphasis here. And so I'm kind of just like this is the first time we've really talked about this. And then in that case, can you do the thing then where you say, like, what is the ongoing and real issues that get interpreted as primarily issues of imperialism? Like, for instance, I'm gonna throw this out there, like some kind of unilateral trade agreement that fucks over India. Like, I'm guessing those kinds of things are always going on, but are they? I mean, and then are there significant ones like NAFTA? Let's go back to NAFTA. NAFTA it decimated Mexico. Mm-hmm. It actually just like decimated Mexican farmers. And predictably, like the people who saw that coming, like they knew it was going to do that. It made it so that those farmers lost their land. Big US companies bought up that land. Those farmers had to fucking find other work. And in a lot of cases, that meant sneaking into the US so that they could work for some big farmer and, for slave wages, right? And so these are the kinds of struggles that, like, I've never met a person who says that they're anti-imperialist who could have told me that about NAFTA, right? And I'm not a policy wonk. I don't know anything about these things, but I do my digging. I don't know too much about India's struggles. Of course, you learn a little bit about Gandhi. Like everyone learns a little bit about Gandhi at some point. But that's a long time ago at this point. And so what are the main kind of frontiers of struggle that get interpreted as primarily imperialist struggle? And then can you show us how they're actually capital?
So, okay, I don't know how well I'll be able to do this, but, I guess an example very much at hand, at least for us, in India right now, like this happened last year, I think, was it around the same time? There's a massive, like, at least I don't even remember, was it last year or 2 years or what? Like there was one of the most like biggest farmers protest happening in India around the capital of Delhi, which was like 250,000 whatever farmers had sort of camped around this capital city of Delhi, right? For 6 months they were there, like camping, and every other day there would be skirmishes with the police or whatever, and all of that. And now it's back, sort of like in the last couple of weeks, since they've been coming back. Now one of the reasons for that is, now that is actually one of the ways, more concretely, it is something local. It's not really, in a certain sense, it's not, at least immediately, it's not some America or like some other imperialist whatever, IMF or whatever, immediately directly trying to impose a certain agreement. right, which resulted into this. But it's partly India's own, capitalist class, which is imposing a new, trade regulations and stuff, whereby, or essentially, it's on the one hand, it's a form of austerity measures, right, whereby previously we had certain social welfare kind of structures, which allowed farmers a guaranteed minimum, uh, like exchange price from the government markets, where you have a certain kind of and a certain minimum produce, and you are guaranteed that the government will buy all of that at that set price, right? So it was like, so the farmers were not completely at the mercy of the fluctuations of the market or whatever, right? And especially of other bigger agro industries, or like players in the agro business, right? So, but now they're doing away with that, with those protections, and so now it will simply be like lays or whatever, and that is partly where the bigger international corporations also come in, right? For them, it's like, no, 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 their claim is, no, we will buy directly from you, from the farmers. We'll cut the middleman who whatever sometimes fucks you over or whatever. You'll directly sell to us, and that will be more profitable for you, and will but the point is, we know this from various other previous experiences. No, this will basically result in a lot of farmers just losing over time, because their conditions themselves are very strict. And for example, like if you're selling potato to Lay's, the chips company or whatever, like their like quality regulation, call it, or whatever, they might even take buy the stuff, but if in terms of quality, if it doesn't match a certain standard, they don't pay you pretty much at all or whatever, right? Over time, what that's gonna do is this, because, and in India, like more than 50% still population still depends on agriculture. But if this thing comes in, it is no longer going to remain a viable option. Lots of farmers are going to just basically end up proletarianized, right? And they will have to look for like labor, whatever jobs, and move to cities or whatever, right? All of those kinds of things. So now the thing is, okay, imperialism, on the one hand, imperialism, we look at it as, okay, one country's like armed aggression on a different country. That is one form of imperial whatever intervention, right? Another form is through IMF or World Bank, or their trading policies and everything, of essentially doing away with certain protective internal regulations that a certain country has, and basically through these organizations taking over a local market, right? And then imposing new conditions in which majority of the smaller um, smaller farmers or smaller uh, businesses cannot compete, right? So in India, like even foreign direct investment, for example, was for a long time a major issue in the parliament. They would, like most parties would oppose it, so as to say that we protect our own local businesses and everything. But then over the last at least 10-15 years, those have progressively been removed more and more, and there's more and more international capital coming in, right? So obviously that is a problem. But the for me today, why I do not like articulating these things in terms of imperialism as against capitalism is because imperialism allows organizing in terms, or organizing or posing this problem more in terms of, call it a very vague us versus them, the India versus the external world, the outside, the Western world versus our, and that more than helping any kind of a socialist or a communist or whatever cause, that ends up equally feeding into very fascist tendencies, for which it can simply just become, oh yeah, like it's not just Western imperialism in terms of whatever their economic policies or whatever that they're trying to impose, but also they are um, funneling in their, Western culture or whatever, and we need to protect our, Indian national heritage or whatever. And this is also the moment where you can see how, and we have actually seen concrete examples of these, how a lot of like right wing in India actually appropriated post-colonial or decolonial kinds of rhetoric, and are using that in terms of, okay, look, this is basically indigenous knowledges or our own pre-modern ways of being, and pre-modern ways of doing things were better than this modernity that the West is imposing on us or whatever, right? So I mean,
this
for
is
me, like,
this is where the whole Alexander Dugin Steve Bannon sort of coalescence approach as well, right? This is why they get to no, actually we're the real anti-racists. We're the real anti-racists because we believe in preserving these identities that are being washed away, right?
The oppressed identities, right? Like from the dominant Western modern whatever oppression. Yeah, like so for me the thing is, like, if we are leftist, communist, socialist, anarchist, whatever, like if we are anti-capitalists in any way, then for me the point is not any of these. Like, the fundamental problem has to be centered around capital and labor. How do we understand that? And all these concrete problems, how are they articulations of that problem, and not in their specific historical modes. Yeah, like, I mean,
I guess my big final two questions. I think we get to all of my big questions I've had burning to ask you. It's going to kind of come down to class and the left, right? And so you obviously come down on the side of labor, or like that we need to focus on labor and understand capital. We need to organize, but we also need to do theory. But also the proletariat, the bourgeoisie are not it's not like these two distinct things that are, one side is growing and the other one is slimming down. It's actually, class seems a lot more complicated than it might have appeared in the 1800s. And so, so it's interesting because you are in this position that I feel it's a contradiction we're in as well. And we've maybe been less responsible with this position because we just say, well, then fuck the left then, like, fuck it, dude. I'm sorry. Where, what left? What are you talking about? And then people are like, well, I'm the real left. Listen to me. And then I'm like, okay, cool, man. But like, we got like guys like Doug Lane and Chris Catrone. I love them to death. I look up to them in some ways. And then I'm like, also like, they're just so like, no, but it still has to be the left. And they have to be the sort of, they're going to articulate what the real left is because they're trying to steer campus radicals in this direction. And I'm like, you're trying to herd chickens, man. It's like you're trying to, like, you got like 10,000 sheep and you're running around by yourself and you don't have dogs helping you. It's like, and the worst part about it is that as far as human beings that you're trying to steer in any direction, this might be the actual worst group, right? Like, this is, and so I see Platypus and I love what they do, but they're thinking about, we got to work through all the contradictions and surface all the contradictions and have all the positions kind of like on the table because everybody's got a little piece of the truth, but they're only looking within the domain of anyone who has called themselves left. So they're not going to consider, for instance, that maybe Heidegger had a point about something, and they're not going to consider that maybe Levinas had a point about something. So that's just like out of the picture, right? So theory has become siloed into people who are serious about Marx and reforming the left or resuscitating the left, let's be honest, versus people who are new left or postmodern, right? Like, that's the kind of two camps here. And then I've always kind of articulated, like, for the most part, approximately for the most part, the old left versus the new left. Like, this split in America, and the scholarship tends to be like the difference between people who are like, what is to be done? And people who are like, yeah, we tried that, it didn't work. Right. I like your approach because I see it as kind of both. You're still kind of doing both. And so I guess I found a way just now, talking my way into turning it all into one question. And so I'll quilt it all together like this. Do you think that, considering the fact that the class situation is not what it was, that the currently existing organizations either don't even care about class or they conceive of it in this old way, that there is any possibility of either reforming or resuscitating this thing called left?
Yeah, okay.
You're gonna have to light another cigarette for that one. Yeah.
No, okay, partly yes. The thing is, okay, this is a big one, this is one of the, and I'm like, and I keep like, okay, yeah, this can be its own, like, and I would love to address this one with also the text, and like, this is one of my projects that I have been trying in my last 2 years at least, that reading Capital politically, concretely, for our specific moments, and trying to see, yeah, where the fuck is the proletariat, or like class, like how do we think of those things today, right? So, and okay, one of the ways in which I would try beginning to address this is through Pushtone himself, right? Where what he's saying is, look, capitalism is an impersonal, abstract mode of domination, right? And what that means is, it is not the bourgeoisie as this very specific historical class, or the capitalists, Jeff Bezos or whoever, who's oppressing,
or me.
Whatever, yeah, right, like, yeah, we are all tiny sovereigns, tiny oppressors, like, to whatever, at various levels, sure.
Yeah.
The point, and in the same way, on the other side of it, it's not like the proletariat was this very specifically the guy that works at the factory or whatever, like, it's like, no, it's not the class struggle, right? And it is true, all hitherto history has been the history of class struggles, right? So that, in that sentence of the Communist Manifesto, Marx and Engels are talking about not only of capitalism, but all prior history too. It's been a history of class struggle. The point is, the problem is, what is special, very specific about capitalism as against the previous, also different articulations of class struggle, right? It was all class struggle, but there's some fundamental qualitative difference between class struggle as it manifested itself in the previous historical epochs, and the form it has in capitalism. In capitalism, it has this impersonal and abstract form, whereby it is not, which is why class truly today becomes class and not a caste, right? Like, in feudal times, you had castes. You had the aristocracy, the nobility, whatever, like, different kinds of castes through which class struggle played out. In capitalism, you have the class has become its own pure sort of a form, which is just labor and capital. And so Marx will say the capitalist is a personification of capital. In the same way, the proletariat, or the working class, the worker, whatever, the guy working 9 to 5, they are a personification of labor. But they are not. They are both labor and the other capital, but also non-identical with it. There's also something non-identical there. So the thing is, it's not simply, and this is where most of the time we get lost, both Marxists and the critics, that, oh yeah, but where is the working class, where's the left? And so the question you posed is, okay, where's the left, right? Your question was more framed in the terms of where's the left, where the revolutionary, whatever, that stuff, and which is why we want to resuscitate it. The real question, even before that, for me, is where the working class itself, where it's labor, right? Because the only point of a left, or at least left as I conceive of it, as a socialist, communist, whatever, like anti-capitalist left, the only point of its existence is if there is a working class or labor or some antagonism, if there is capitalism, because capitalism is nothing out like apart from the labor and capital contradiction, right? So if, first of all, if we are still facing a situation where there is a continuation of the contradiction between labor and capital, and our world is structured through that contradiction, then firstly, then the question of the working class has not disappeared, irrespective of our inability, or its own inability maybe, to present itself as itself. First of all, doesn't matter if it doesn't present itself in its own face, with its own face. If the labor capital contradiction is still around, the problem of the working class is still around. If the problem of the working class is still around, then the question for us, of a left, of a anti-capitalist left, that problem hasn't left us. We may be to some extent, in whatever ways, inadequate for addressing those problems, and therefore be an inadequate left, but that problem is still there. So the task for us is partly to understand. And now I don't think the capital labor contradiction has gone away. I don't think the working class itself has gone away. The problem precisely is that the working class, as we thought it, what it was, and because just like those different identities, right, from which emerged as radical in the 60s and 70s, which today we keep this memory of as something inherently, these identities that are somehow inherently radical. In the similar way, we have this memory of the working class as that very specific historical form of the working class of the 1920s and that time, which we take to be the working class fundamentally, essentially, right? No, it is working class. The worker is a personification of that thing that is labor, right? Labor in its capitalist historical mode, or labor specifically as the negation of capital. So now the question is, okay, what are the forms in which labor itself manifests itself? Labor as the negation of capitalism. So that is one of our tasks. And based off of that task, our second task is then, so what is the form, the political organizational expression of that opposition, that negation of capitalism will take? So to the extent that the left, but that we see today in its concrete forms, to the extent that it does not even recognize, doesn't even see what exactly, doesn't have the language, or doesn't know how to articulate what the working class is, or where it is, or how to understand that contradiction, to that extent the left is dead. And yeah, to that extent we don't even know who are we talking to, or who to even address, right? But at the same time, like, it will have to be like, now, I mean, what the content of that left is, I mean, that's what we need to build, or gather again somehow, right? Resuscitate or whatever, right? But for me, like, the problem remains. And now how we find it, I mean, to the questions of whatever, like, I don't know, yeah. I mean, yeah, this is broadly how I'm looking at things. I don't know if to what extent.
No, but you've also, I mean, man, this is as you said, this is something you want to put on, clinical gloves, and get all careful with, like, you want to. So and I literally just said we're less responsible about this. And part of the reason is because I wanted that to be a filter. I want to filter out from my vicinity people who are trying to do lefter than thou purity testing. I do want to filter them out, but also, when it comes to issues like pro-life and guns, if these are make or break issues for somebody when it comes to organizing, I don't believe they have the possibility of prioritizing labor, right? That's, that's basic. There's the problem, though, of like being realists, I guess. Like, this is a problem. And that is, like, it's kind of like you were so good at reminding us to be careful about how we talk about fetishization, right? Well, it's real. I haven't gone into this, but like, I feel like I've been straddling this space of like, I sit there and I just consider, I'm like, but what if like identity realism is just like most of the people that we're critiquing because we see through it. We understand what's really going on, blah, blah, blah. But what if they said, no, man, but it's real though. It's real in the sense that this is the only frontier and possible way of doing politics anymore. And then of course I don't know, Nance no, go ahead, Nance, say your thing. Oh no.
I think, because I've had that thought before too. And I think that's a good thought. I think that's a good impulse is to say, well, what if? But I think, it like we also have to be responsible and come back and be willing to ask why. Like if you're going to posit that these are the most radical positions, that these are the only possible radical positions, okay, I'll entertain it. Why? They can't answer why. They always want to go back to this historical narrative of oppression. And again, I will listen and I will honor it, and it is valid and it is real, and we can take that and fold it into where we're going. But like I do think it is evident.
But I did just say why though. And that is because it is impossible to organize on the basis of labor. Now we can say, oh, well, it's happened.
That's why
it's happened at this one auto plant. It's happened, for this hot second, this flash where people were like, hey, Bernie, right? But like the conditions of possibility for Bernie are never going to happen again. I just don't think it's going to ever happen again, right? There's not a guy in politics, and it would probably have to be a fucking guy who's actually able to speak out of both sides of his mouth to enough people. Like, and should we all hold out hope that some messiah figure is going to come along who could do that and also be more based at the same time? Okay. But the point is it's not that though. It's just that I don't think that the recalcitrant, way in which we kind of segregate ourselves on these atomized struggles on the basis of identity is just idealism. And when I say it's material though, I'm thinking about the actual structure of the schooling system. Like, I'm thinking about the actual structure of labor itself. I'm thinking about everything that changed with terms like PMC or labor aristocracy are, arguably getting at a piece of what I'm talking about, but what I'm getting at goes beyond that, because we're talking about how much a person who loves metal hates country. We're talking about how much a person who grew up between this year and this year sees themselves as a distinct category of human being that is different and better or worse or ahead or behind of these other very micro slices of what used to be called generations. Like we have like these hyper concentrated, and it's like, okay, that's not made up. And it comes out of the schooling system that didn't exist at the time that the mass working class movements were rising. The public education that was rolled out wasn't rolled out to satisfy the demands of labor for children to be educated. It was meant to put it back to sleep. It was meant to get out ahead of working class organizing and then render it impossible from ever happening again. Like, it's like, in a certain sense, it's like, okay, we all probably listen to different kinds of music. Maybe there's a little similarity here or there, but we don't care. We're over it. Like I'm like sitting here, I've been thinking about writing this essay for like the last month called I fucking hate music now. Right? And it's because it is the most divisive thing in my life. Like because I treat music anthropologically now. Like after my scene kid days, I don't care. Like, oh, you listen to Post Malone, you listen to Taylor Swift, I don't care. Cool. What does it do for you? Makes you want to dance. You don't care. You're just trying to hang out. You're having fun. Or maybe it games you at some very like naive level, but like feelings are usually naive, not some super sophisticated mathy fucking core bullshit. Right. And so like, the hyper differentiation of like, oh yeah, but I listen to music from like this pure. No, it's because you went to high school, dude. Like it's because you went to high school and you had to differentiate yourself from everybody else, because it's not a normal human situation to mass intern a slice of the human species at a specific age and then create this ranked differentiation within these artificial peer groups, always in reference to the big other and master signifiers of what you're going to be when you grow up and how everybody's forced into this shitty situation. Okay. So it's like, I don't think that we can just get out of it. And there might be like these moments where we can kind of, because things are so bad for a hot minute, we can all kind of like transcend look, I think we all are transcending these things, but we're niche weirdos on the internet. That's what it all comes down to. We're the niche weirdos on the internet trying to think about a mass politics. Like that's like the essential contradiction. Now, most people who are trying to do left stuff, they don't see a contradiction there. They're the niche weirdos, but they think they can actually say something that's going to work for a mass movement. And so ever since I got Normie Politics pilled by Angela Nagel, I've slowly just like, it actually is like people don't, I think that the reason it's so symptomatic, like the people are so angry about that book still to this day, is because if you actually take the final paragraph, I think, which is just like, maybe we should center normies when it comes to how we talk. If you take it seriously, everything that's supposedly radical just starts to kind of fall apart, because as fringe as you want to be, as advanced as you want to be, if you're not thinking of something that can work for most people, regardless of X, Y, and Z bullshit identifications, it's not going to work out, right? So I guess I'm at this point now where, okay, going back to Andre Gore's The Disappearance of the Proletariat, which got translated as working class, which is sad because obviously he doesn't think the working class went away. It's the disappearance of the proletariat. And obviously it didn't disappear. It's just hiding. It's hiding at that factory over there. We don't see those people, like that's my brother. That's my dad. It's not, most people. So the disappearance of the proletariat is about the structural conditions that have made it ineffective and strategically, we could say, suicidal to be like, no, we could all just be together as workers again. Like, as though we live in a material situation where this kind of marked disparity was so obvious in Charles Dickens' world, right? Like, I don't know, Nance, I know this is a question for Sahil, but I want to give you a second here to push back on that and or elaborate, because we both read Andre Gore's together. And so do you want to add something to that question? Do you want to add some nuance to it or something? Because, I feel like the disappearance of the working class issue has been like or proletariat issue has been one that we've been working through for a while now.
Yeah, I think for like it leads me to confront my doomerism. And half of me gleefully sits back and enjoys the end times, because half of me really does believe we're fucked and there's nothing we can do. There's no way out, because change is impossible at this point. But then there's the other half of me, and it's not equally half, it's part. I don't know. It's maybe Monday, Tuesday. I don't fucking know. Yeah. Sometimes I just want to light a cigarette and wear a beanie and watch the world burn. And other times I do think that we are at a pivotal point in history, because the modes of production and consumption and subjectivity have all been forced into such an uproar. The disappearance of the proletariat, the over-reliance on identities and stuff like that make workers' politics impossible, make class politics impossible. And I think that could be a good thing. I think we might be approaching a point in time where we have access to new tools that allow us to develop new ways of thinking about change. And I don't know. I think Sahil, I think you kind of already did answer the question, or at least the question that as I would ask it, and just kind of saying your prescription is that currently there isn't a prescription, but also you do seem to maintain more of that responsibility, more of that. I don't want to say optimism because I don't want you to take it the wrong way, but I think an honorable, like, you haven't given up, whereas sometimes I feel like I have given up.
Look, on that, optimism, pessimism, hope, or giving up, like I think I'm exactly there with you. Like it's like a Monday or Tuesday or whichever, like one day it's something, another day it's another thing, or at times maybe it's like, depending on who I'm talking to. If when I meet somebody, some really hopeful, like somebody who's like, yes, we're doing this, we're out in the streets, like changing something, I'm like, nope, not gonna happen. It's not happening. Like we yeah, it's all going to shit. Like at that point, I'm with like Žižek, I'm like, I would prefer not to, you guys go on, whatever. It's no, right? Or like I do believe like that this is the other thing. Partly we do need to take seriously this, this possibility or whatever, the like Marx and Engels in the Communist Manifesto, they basically they pose these two possibilities, at least. Like it's not an inevitable, march of history towards communism, utopia, or whatever. No, it can equally be a total ruin of the contending classes, or just socialism or barbarism. And it's looking more and more like it's definitely barbarism, um, in front of us, right? So on the one hand, I like, and I both sort of like to insist at times on, and I find myself on the side of absolute, like, like pure absolute hopelessness. Like there's nothing coming, there's no hope, right? But at the same time, then, like, because like for me, I don't know what else is there if there isn't, that. So like it's like for me, I exist in this absolute contradiction, if you will, where it's like pure hopelessness, and yet in the somewhere within all this doom and gloom, something good. Like I don't know if you guys, like, I would assume you're not into that, but like Ernst Bloch, um the philosopher Ernst Bloch, no, he was like sort of like Frankfurt School adjacent in a certain sense. He wrote this, 3-volume thing, The Principle of Hope. I don't know. So like, yeah, I do kind of like that too. Like in at the bottom of it, like, look, in the end, we have nothing if we don't have what what's called the utopian impulse. It's not a utopia, or it's not an idea, or it's not a a blueprint, or like some whatever. It's an impulse, and that for me, like, is something essential, something crucial, without which, like, and that is something like sort of following Block. Like I do believe, and I do see it in, even like in the middle of ideology, wherever, like in pure ideology, everything is subsumed, whatever, and yet right in the middle of it, or somewhere in there, there's also that. And that is something at I mean, it is, to an extent, it has to be the counter to to capitalist realism, or like to the pure our acceptance of our present reality, where our cynical age, where we no longer, despite all kinds of our proclamations of, yeah, we are whatever, communist, anarchist, this, that, like, we really do, our politics demonstrates that we don't really have any hope anymore. Like from those times 100 years ago, where like masses were rallying, and it was like, yeah, capitalism's days are numbered, and we're ushering in a new era or whatever. From those days, look at our politics today. We fight for meager minimum kinds of things, right? Like even those things, like the realm of possibility for us today has shrinked so much. Like we can't even dare to, like it's like, Zizek talks about coffee without cream, or cigarettes without nicotine, or whatever, right? Like, I mean, today what we often find is like, communism without communism, essentially. It's like, or communists without that, in a certain way, which is like a tragic, state we're in, if you want. But like, I find myself often, you know, bipolar in that aspect, I guess. But
well, Sahil, I'm really glad things worked out the way that they did, so that we were able to have this conversation. Thanks, Nance. Thanks, Sahil. Everybody, you're watching this the day after it happened. If you're watching it in the premiere, what's up? I'll be at work listening. I'll have been checking in on the chat. And for people watching this after it premieres, I mean, ultimately, we really did do it for you. But real quick, for the people who are watching this during the premiere, I want to let you know that there's something really awesome happening on February 22nd, and that is another epic marathon live stream. This one's going to be like the other ones, but more. It's bigger. So it's going to start at an inhumane early hour, and it's going to go until good, I don't know, the evening. I mean, it'll go until 8 p.m. Eastern time, which is, that's pretty bad if you're in Europe. But it's going to start at like 6 p.m. Eastern time. That's crazy, but I have to do it because I'm trying to get a lot of stuff out, on this. And so it's okay that some people won't be able to see it until after the fact, or see, the beginning part until after the fact. But there's a lot of different people that I wanted to have on this one thing. And it's, this is in part going to be more on the question of accelerationism, more on the question of religion, theology, occultism, right? What is the relation of those things to politics? What is the relation of those things to philosophy for a bunch of dirty atheists like us, right? And the thing is it's like theory and philosophy have been the sort of last refuge of a kind of thinking that tries to maintain some kind of rigor, and religion tends to be not that. We'll be very nice and just say it's not that, right? And if you feel a little insulted because I said that, oh, I'm sorry. I'm the one who got spankings every day as a little kid because I wondered why. And that was rebellion, because in the, strict religious household, households of America, questioning is a sign of disobedience. It's a sign of rebellion. It's the highest sin, right? And so for those who've come from like these progressive homes where it's okay to question, but you're still religious, cool guys. I don't know what religion is to you and your, posh little, I don't even know, like your little sect, but like normally that's not how it plays out. And there's this new rise of theology guys in the theory scene. They come through Lacan, they come through Heidegger. There's even some of them who are Marxist. Some of them are like just theory maths or something, you know what I mean? And I think two of my favorite theology sympathetics, I wanted to say simps, but no, I mean in the term of sympathetic, right? Would be Samuel Loncar from Becoming Human Project and Daniel Garner of OG Rose, who is also one of the Capital Mondays people at this point. And like I have a respect for them that I don't have for a lot of people. And so then the fact that they take something like theology seriously, and not just like, oh, it's serious, it has like this real efficacy, but like something beyond that is really interesting to me, because like they seem like really serious and rigorous thinkers. But we also have a lot of people who are, using Lacan or some theorist to do theology, and they're coming up in the space and they're talking about spirituality now. They're resuscitating religion in these spaces. And I don't think they're rigorous or serious at all. I think that they're fucking snake oil salesmen. I think that big alarm bells go off. And I've had fellow travelers arguing with me behind the scenes for years about some of them. No, you should associate with this person. You should talk to this person. This person's actually great. And I'm like, well, when I read that person or when I hear that person talk, it's what I try not to do my whole life. It's what I try not to do. I see them capitalizing on what I try not to do. And that is just say what sounds good. They're just saying what sounds good. They're going with what they think you need to hear. But of course, they're not going to tell you how they've come to the conclusion that you need to hear it. And of course, they're not really going to tell you who their real audience is. And they're not going to tell you what their real agenda is. And it might just be social posturing. It might just be social or cultural capital. It might be a genuine religious, faith-based belief. It might be something else. I don't know. But this is a tension for me, because I also feel like when it comes to mass movements, some kind of way of working with religious people is also important. And on those days where I'm optimistic, then I say it would have to work for, a lot more people than people like us, right? And then on those dark days, I just go, it's just us, man. Beanie on, let's go. It's funny, I didn't even ever think of beanies as a signifier of anything except for like, I want to cover my ears today. But all right. And that's because I'm not one of these guys that does like the condom top beanie, where their ears are still out. Like, I don't know what those guys are doing, but they probably need to be gulagged for sure, Anyway, we're going to have a replay of an interview with Yela Krepchik, who is actually Slavoj Žižek's wife, as the first in that series that day, followed by Leon Brenner, followed by a conversation with Michał and Łukasz from Poland, as well as Bram from Scotland, and potentially, I think, we've got Cadell last, who will be joining us from France. And really, this is there's a couple others who might be joining, but that segment in particular is about the Theory Underground European tour. And we're going to talk about the different events that are going to be happening there. After that, it's going to be Malcolm Collins, talk about a theology guy. But the thing is he wrote The Pragmatist's Guide to Constructing Religion. And so he and his wife, Simone, the other author of that text, they are secular pragmatists who argue in defense of all kinds of religious experiments, including extreme right-wing ones. And they're kind of crazy. Like these guys, you'll see, like these guys are actually like off my radar kind of. But I'm fascinated by the work they're doing. And Malcolm has some really interesting stuff to say. And so that's going to be crazy. And then we're going to have Dwayne Roussel on. If you don't know about him, he's a big time Lacanian, fellow traveler of Slavoj Žižek. This is going to be the OG Rose and Becoming Human project. I'm going to be introducing Samuel Loncar to Daniel Garner, because I just think that these two guys it's like the two guys who I respect when it comes to this theology stuff. I want to have them both in one place, ask them both questions, see what happens. It's only 50 minutes. And then after that, another combo, Nina Power and Benjamin Studebaker. I mean, my God, like Benjamin Studebaker came on for a conversation with us about the PMC like not too long ago. I'm still working through his book. And it's like, I've had few conversations in the last 5 years that were like that one. That one was a really special one. Nance, what would you say about that conversation?
Yeah, it was, I don't know. It was unexpected. And he had kind of a glee in a little bit of pessimism. But he treated it, I don't know, again, very carefully. And he was just kind of very determined to get to the bottom of what's going on with these stratified relations in cultural stuff, and I don't know, he's like, yeah, this is bullshit, but it doesn't have to be defeating. And it was really invigorating conversation. Like after that conversation, I was really pumped.
And he had a kind of humanity that is rare, as like a kind of like humane, sympathetic to all sides. Like, I think there's a little bit of that here in this conversation, especially coming from Sahil. And it always it gives me heart. Like it makes me feel like, okay, there's other people out there who kind of get it, except that they seem to have more of the resources I lack when it comes to patience, tolerance, empathy. Matt McManus will come on. I wanted to say also Nina Power. Come on. Amazing conversation with Nina and Benjamin together. Like that to me is crazy. I didn't realize they were doing a podcast together. That's why I'm bringing them both on together, is because I think that's awesome. Then we got Matt McManus, who's been doing research into right-wing postmodernism. And McManus is, he's big in the left. He's actually probably too left for me to be bringing on, in fact, which is kind of crazy that he wants to come on, or like that I don't know if he wants to. He agreed. And I'm excited that he's going to honor us with his presence. And, I respect the work that he's doing. So we're going to have a conversation about it. I think it's basically going to be, Heidegger's a Nazi. What kind of resistance do you get to that position? And like his politics are actually political. Like his philosophy is actually political. I now hold that position. I didn't used to hold that position. But then we'll also see if he agrees with me that Heidegger's right about some things and you actually have to take him seriously, or if he's not doing that. And I'll hopefully have a better conception of that after tomorrow, because I'm going to be listening to some of his book. Chapter 5 of his newest book, I think, is where it's at. But anyway, I'm just going to go fast now. We got to get this out of the way because, like, Sahil, I know you got to go soon. So I'm just going to say Adrian Johnston. No, after McManus, it's going to be Todd McGowan, then Adrian Johnston, then Doug Lane, and then James of Hermetics. All right. So talking about somebody who's talked to Nick Land and is into the occult and is all this weird shit. Like, James is actually a really interesting guy. He was super into land and accelerationism, and now he's not. Like, he's still kind of into it, but like, he's not like a true believer in this sense. He's kind of post that. And I want to ask him a lot of questions about why he's post that. And Mikey wants to ask him a bunch of questions about lemurs, I think. So then we're going to have potentially Chris Catrone, and then the Terrence Blake interview that we did, Nance. We're going to stream that for the first time. And then the headliner of the whole thing is a CCRU original member. She is arguably one of the most important people when it comes to accelerationism, especially when it comes to thinking about megacities and how those are developing as a form of capital AI. And that is Anna Greenspan. So, this is all contingent on a lot of things. People's internet working, people actually showing up. People could cancel. They could say, I forgot about this. But right now, these are all people who've agreed to be there at these times. I don't know if anybody's ever tried to organize anything internationally. All of those people are in different time zones. It's like, honestly, like, it might be one of the more complicated things that I've learned how to do, is to put something like that together. But this one is probably going to be the coolest in a lot of ways. Like, this will be the coolest one that's happened. And then I might not do another one for 3 to 6 months, because this is going to be a big one. It's going to be so big that I imagine I'll probably need a whole day off afterwards. I'll just do edibles and lay in one spot the whole day just to kind of resuscitate. I don't know. Maybe I'm joking, but all right. With that, we're going to close this thing out. Thank you guys so much for coming. I hope to see everybody on February 22nd. If you can't make it to the whole thing, nobody can, I promise. Then just come to part of it. Stay high. We'd love to see you. Peace.
We cannot do direct revolution, but the only way to lay the foundation for it is to do what you are doing to move the underground. It's a theoretically correct title.
Welcome to Theory Underground, where workers with earbuds can find genuine liberation from necessity.
Research at Theory Underground focuses on what is most important for understanding our current situation. Theory of the subject, capital, time-energy theory, critical media theory, CMT, and the most essential critiques necessary for understanding why the theory, ideology, and common sense of influencers left to right misses the mark.
Theory Underground is a publishing house as well as lecture course and social media platform.
You've been reading Underground Theory.
Yes.
And
amazing book. I'm a publisher and an editor. I run and review of books. Literally, it's my living. This is the best edited collection I've ever read.
Jesus Christ.
Seriously.
This is a little experiment in what I, David McKerracher, can pull off without relying on the academy or the algorithmic dictates of the attention economy. I believe that I am, like so many others, pioneering a future in which educators can form learning webs that will make learning as a way of life enjoyable and emancipatory. However, before these tools become accessible, they have to be experimented with. That's why I built my own website and app using nothing more than my own saved wages, 5 patrons, and some small classes of students over the last year. Of course, I also have had my wife Anne's moral support and help with accounting so that I don't get in trouble with the IRS or whatever. In less than a year, Theory Underground has already put out 8 courses, 2 books, one, my book, Timenergy, and the other, Underground Theory, which has over 30 contributors, including works written by students at Theory Underground, some of my fellow travelers, and colleagues in the broader universe of Underground Theory. Beyond the books and courses, though, you will also find interviews, reading exegetical reaction sessions, and live weekly events for working class autodidacts, independent researchers, and renegade academics. These include a variety of clubs and cohorts that meet on a weekly or monthly basis. If you want to get involved, there are 4 main subscription levels.
Think of it like a gym membership, but for your mind.
The point is to make learning, practice, and theoretical comprehension a way of life. If I can triple my subscribers in the next 2 months, I can quit my gig at Amazon and focus on this work full time. All I need is a few more people at each of the levels, or a couple big-time patrons who just want to see it happen. Right now I am doing a patron and site subscriber drive, so excuse the commercial. But if you end up really liking what goes on at this channel, consider signing up soon. I hope that you either will or have enjoyed the program, and also make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and leave this playing in the background all the time while you're doing other things.
Playing long-form Theory Underground content in the background while you do things has, in the near future, been scientifically proven to emancipate minds from the functional illiteracy imposed on workers by the structural stultification of time energy. This is achieved by reterritorializing circumspective concern.
Also, to some degree, it is for the algorithm.